60 Minutes is constantly on the lookout for places we've never been before. So when our late colleague Bob Simon heard about a magical place in the Hebrides Islands off the coast of Scotland, known for making some of the great whiskies in the world, well, the story spoke to him. The place is called Islay, and it's one of 5 whiskey-producing regions in Scotland that make an expensive type of Scotch called single malt. Islay's distilleries turn out relatively small amounts of their own handcrafted brands for a worldwide luxury market that's more than doubled in size in the last decade and become the spirit equivalent of the fine wine business. Bob liked good Scotch and beautiful places, so he went off to Scotland. He died before he could finish the piece, leaving behind a stack of videotapes and some random notes. We decided to finish it for him and raise a glass in his memory. Islay is a small island 20 miles off the west coast of Scotland. There are few trees, miles of windswept heather, and some of the most fertile agricultural land in Scotland. There are sheep and cattle everywhere and an abundance of wildlife. But that's not why people come here. This is 8 small distilleries that produce some of the world's finest single malt whiskies.
This is the whole lifeblood of this island and everybody on it. This is all we know.
Jim McEwen has been working at Islay's distillery since he was 15 years old. He's now master of the works at Bruichladdich.
I just thank God that he chose the Scots and gave them whiskey, because we appreciate the gift and we look after it.
They've been making it here since the 15th century, when supposedly some monks taught the locals how to use barley, water, and yeast to make a spirit the Scots now call the water of life. They've been perfecting it for 600 years. The distilleries are easy to find, but hard to pronounce. Ardbeg, Bamore, Bruichladdich, Bunnahabhain, Caligula, Kilchoman, Lagavulin, and Lefroy. As Bob Simon noted, they get harder to pronounce the more you visit.
For us guys on the west coast of Scotland, whiskey is a religion because it's a provider. And the great thing about whiskey is not just a drink, it's much more than that. Have you ever watched some old Hollywood movies?
Yes, I have.
Scotch was always portrayed in Hollywood as a whiskey when you were down or you were in trouble. The one thing that was going to get you back on your feet and out there was a Scotch.
Today, if you're down on your luck, you probably can't afford an Islay single malt. The good ones start at around $70 a bottle. The rare ones can go for hundreds of dollars a glass at chic whiskey bars around the world, where they're known for their distinctive smoky taste. It comes from peat, the mossy earthen fuel that's cut from bogs on the island. It was used to heat Scottish homes for centuries and is still used to toast the barley at Islay distilleries. John Campbell is the master distiller at Lefroy, one of the top-selling single malts in America.
Peat is the thing that makes Islay unique, and it really resonates with people, and it just engenders a kind of love-hate relationship, and the people that love it absolutely love it with a passion.
And there seems to be no shortage of them. Islay is not easy to get to, usually requiring multiple flights, a long drive, and a 2-hour ferry ride. Yet enthusiasts continue to make the pilgrimage, especially for the Whiskey Festival.
We get literally thousands upon thousands of single malt tourists coming here. They come from all over the world just to set foot on Islay.
To study it?
No, to drink it. It's lovely. It's clean, it's fresh, it's vibrant.
Officially, Whiskey Fest is a celebration of Islay's culture, but mostly it's about drinking.
Absolutely beautiful. No off notes at all.
As they listen to Jim McEwen extol the virtues of Bruichladdich, the novitiates, connoisseurs, and whiskey snobs approached each glass with reverence bordering on the religious.
Oh, wow. The fruit in that is incredible.
As the glasses empty, the smiles got bigger. But the islanders will tell you that all of this warmth and good feeling comes not from the alcohol in the spirits, but from the spirit of the place. It is almost mystical, beautiful, dramatic, and quiet. There's no road rage, barely any traffic. If you do get hung up, it's probably because of a farm animal. They have the right of way. And if you do happen upon people, they'll almost always greet you with the Islay wave.
So everybody just waves because it's just friendly. There's not so many of us, so you just wave to say hi.
It's what Ailsa Hayes liked about the island when she moved her family here from London to take a manager's position at one of Isla's thriving distilleries.
It's strange, is it not, that such a small place with so few people, your products are known everywhere in the world.
I know, well, it makes us all very proud, it does. There's such a boom worldwide for single malts. It's fantastic, and you can really feel that on the island. A lot of the distilleries have doubled production, and so there's a lot of opportunities there as well.
And there's no reason to believe that that won't continue.
Well, times are good, people drink. Times are bad, people drink.
Is it possible to be socially acceptable to be a teetotaler on this island?
Yes.
Are there any?
Yes. No, I'm not one of them.
Over the years, the island's people have learned how to entertain themselves, often at gatherings called ceilidhs, which feature traditional dance and sad songs, mostly about leaving Isla and yearning to return.
To sit with my love on the bridge above the rippling waterfall, to go back home, never more to roam, is my dearest wish of all.
If this looks and feels a lot like Ireland, that's no coincidence. It's only 25 miles away. They come from the same tribe, share the same Celtic culture and Gaelic language, not to mention a love of good whiskey that gets them through stormy weather and the long winter nights. There are no movie theaters on Island, no dry cleaners, no supermarkets, no McDonald's, at least in the fast food business. Jim McEwen says there's a long list of things that Isla doesn't have and doesn't want.
We don't have any crime. We don't have mugging, carjacking, housebreaking, rape, just dope, drugs. We don't have that. You can keep that. You're very welcome to it.
How do you explain the fact that there's no crime here? There's crime everywhere else.
If you commit a crime in a small community, you will be ostracized and have to leave. Not only that, your family, your children and your children's children will be remembered as the children of the man who committed the crime.
Most Scots are forthright, practical people who are proud of their country and the fact that their most famous export has withstood the test of time. They see themselves as artisans, and making whiskey is more about art and alchemy than manufacturing. Every distiller has their own secrets and superstitions. We'll give you the unclassified 2-minute tour. Sorry, we can't offer you free samples. It begins with a bit of trickery on the malting floor, when barley that's been soaked in water is spread out and raked over and over to convince the grain it's spring and time to germinate, releasing the starches that are locked inside. It's then dried with peat smoke to add flavor and ground into flour, sometimes with 19th century machinery, and then mixed with hot water, transforming the starches into a sugary concoction called mash.
Smell that, Bob?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that, you can smell the goodness.
Yeast is then added, changing the sugar into alcohol, a primitive ale, which is then cooked a couple of times in copper stills, where the vapor is collected and condensed into this clear liquid.
And that's the stuff we want to go into the barrel.
But what I'm looking at is this looks like rubbing alcohol. This is, in fact, the whiskey.
It's very good. If you need a rub, there's no doubt about it.
I bet it would be good. But once it goes into the barrel, from then it's just time.
It's just time. And it's a great journey, you know. This is a child, but the cask is the mother. And that's what makes the journey. If you give a good cask, you're bound to get a good child. It's that simple.
It takes less than 3 weeks to make, but requires at least 10 years of aging in these oak casks, which add flavor and color to turn it into world-class single malt whiskey.
You'll see some of the names. There's Clement Springs, Buffalo Trace, Jim Beam.
Bob was surprised to learn that 97% of the casks used to make single malt whiskey had been previously used to age American bourbon and bought secondhand from U.S. distillers. It's testimony to the ingenuity and frugality of the Scots, who have very few oak trees.
Without the American barrel, there would be no whiskey industry. It's as simple as that.
A sophisticated palate will detect a hint of the oak and bourbon in Isla's single malt, as well as the sweetness of sherry that comes from wine casks bought in Europe. Before the final product is sold, it will have done time in a number of different casks. Master distiller Jim McEwen is the one who decides when to rotate them and when each barrel is ready to be bottled. He opened a young cask for Bob to sample.
I would describe that as mellow yellow, absolutely pure.
And it's only 7 years old.
That's right. Young whiskies are like young people. They're vibrant, they're full of life. In fact, this for me is like coming home from work. At the end of the day, I work really hard. Nobody appreciates me. My wife doesn't appreciate me. My kids don't appreciate me. Life's a bitch.
Couple of glasses of that and it doesn't matter.
A couple of shots of that and I am the king of the world.
Absolutely. You know, frankly, I never liked this stuff, but the way you're talking me into it.
But you got to check every barrel.
I certainly hope so. Cheers.
McEwen is the man responsible for the taste and consistency of the whiskeys at Bruichladdich, which requires a very personal involvement with the product.
I have heard you described as the cask whisperer.
I do talk to casks, there's no doubt about it.
In what language?
Mainly English, and it depends how many whiskies I've had. If I'd have a few whiskies, I tend to revert to the Gaelic language, so I'm talking to the cask. It's just one of these things, you go into the warehouse and you pop the bung out, and you draw your sample, yeah, and you look at it and you think, wow, you're beautiful. But you're not just ready yet. Tell you what, I'm going to come back and see you in 3 months, okay? And other times you find a cask which is so incredibly good, you can't not speak. You say, oh my God, you are the most beautiful thing I have ever tasted in my life. You know, and you think, oh jeez, I just want to share this with somebody. But there's nobody around, there's just me and the cask.
We'll stay.
On most days, McEwen devotes several hours to quality control, checking up on several hundred casks.
But it's a fantastic job, nosing and tasting whiskies.
And you can still walk out of here in the evening.
Occasionally I need some help, there's no doubt about that, yeah.
Dying devotion to one's whiskey is apparently not all that unusual. While we were on Islay, the camera crew ran into a party of Canadians, the friends and family of a deceased single malt lover named Bill, who wanted his ashes scattered in the waters opposite his favorite distillery. Funds for the pilgrimage were set aside in his will.
That's what I wanted. It's good, it's good. To Bill.
Bill, Angela.
Now he's happy. Now he's happy.
After that, the only thing left was for Bob to say goodbye to Jim McEwen, and it turned out to be last call for our old pal, Bob Simon.
Cheers, Bob. Hope you've enjoyed this little visit here.
You're speaking in the past, it's not over.
Yeah, I'm going to get you out of here, man. This is you're costing me a fortune.
We're about to visit a place few people have seen firsthand, the Vatican Library, a vast collection of historic treasures beyond compare, founded over 5 centuries ago when Europe was coming out of the Dark Ages, a period of so-called humanism, when the Catholic Church was open to new ideas in philosophy, science, and the human spirit. It's the Pope's library, but it contains much more than just church documents. There are manuscripts going back nearly 2,000 years on music and math, warfare and exploration, even cookbooks and love letters. The library is closed to the public, a place for scholars only. But the Vatican agreed to let us in to see some of the priceless artifacts of our collective past. Welcome to the 15th century. In Rome, turn a corner and you bump into antiquity, a delicious mixed salad of present and past. We arrived at the Vatican to find a medieval costume parade in progress. What better way to begin a trek through history?
There's about 2 million printed books.
2 million printed books. And inside the library, the past surrounded us again as we were shown the magnificent building and its riches.
This is the Urbino Bible.
For instance, this spectacular Bible commissioned in 1476 by the Duke of Urbino.
Who wanted to have a very fancy Bible.
Well, here you go.
And this is what he got.
Library curator Timothy Jans tells us The Bible took years to make by hand, letter by letter, picture by picture.
Decorated with real gold.
It's just one of the library's 80,000 handwritten manuscripts from the ages before the printing press. Add to that those 2 million or so printed books, Christian and pagan, sacred and profane, in virtually every language known to man. There are thousands of prints and drawings, windows on the past,
Questa è una moneta papale.
and a huge collection of ancient coins. This was the money of Palestine 2,000 years ago, including the kind of silver coins Judas was said to have been paid to betray Christ. Here is a map of the world drawn 50 years before Columbus. At its edge, the Towers of Paradise. And an immediate bestseller, Columbus's description of his voyage to the New World, published in 1493. In a certain way, the library is kind of the attic of Western civilization.
It's so true, and it's like many attics. You know, you put things up all the time, you keep on pushing over boxes to make space for more things.
Father Michael Collins is an Irish priest who's written extensively about the Vatican, where the library's shelves, if you put them end to end, would stretch for 31 miles. Is there any single person who really knows what the library holds?
Nobody knows exactly what's there, because it would be impossible for the human brain to understand, to remember the titles, who wrote it, when they were written.
It is quite a treasure of the humanity that you have here.
Monsignor Cesare Passini presides over the library. Its great hall, essentially unchanged over the centuries, is a picture gallery of antiquity. Saints, philosophers, and depictions of the great libraries of the pre-Christian world. Babylon, Athens, Alexandria, a shrine to learning and to books. There's one person who can actually take a book out of the library, correct?
Yes, the Pope can have every book in the library.
If St. Peter's Basilica represents the splendor of the church writ large, the library nearby is a testament to the monks and scribes who made magnificent miniatures in times past. Here, some devotional music commissioned by Pope Leo X, and the text of the Christmas Mass used at the altar by Alexander VI, both manuscripts 5 centuries old, written on parchment, treated animal skin.
You will often see the skin of sheep being used, sometimes goats.
Christopher Celenza, director of the American Academy in Rome, is a scholar who's often used the library. He says that writing on parchment was not only tedious, but expensive.
If a monastery wanted to produce a Bible that perhaps had 400 pages, it might cost you 400 sheep. It's an investment.
Beyond the academic work, did you ever just come here to hang out and flip through stuff and see what you might discover?
I think all of us have come here at one time or another with the hope of discovering something, having a general direction in which we're going, but not quite knowing where it will wind up.
You might find, as curator Adalbert Roth showed us, drawings of a German jousting tournament in 1481, or an old cookbook telling us that Roman foodies in the 4th century dined on chicken, veal, seafood, pancakes in milk, and whipped pear cake.
How to hack away at your enemy's wall.
Or from an 11th century treatise on the art of war, a Byzantine soldier brandishing a flamethrower, something the Greeks invented 1,500 years earlier. Or Henry VIII's love letters to Anne Boleyn.
The letters are certainly among the most bizarre and unusual letters you'd expect to find in the Pope's archives.
There are 17 of them, handwritten by the King of England to the woman he would make the second of his 6 wives, and later have beheaded.
There's the little heart.
Henry signs his name with a heart, like a smitten schoolboy. He tells of his fervence of love, his great loneliness without her, wishing myself, he says, in my sweetheart's arms, whose pretty duckies I trust shortly to kiss. Duckies being a term in Henry's day for, well, use your imagination. What is that doing in the Vatican Library?
We don't know how they ended up here in the Vatican. It may be that some spy, maybe one of my priestly predecessors, may have stolen these letters and brought them to Rome to present in the case if a trial was made for Henry's request for divorce.
But the church refused to let Henry divorce Catherine of Aragon so he could marry Anne. He married her anyway, broke with Rome, and took control of the Church of England. The country was largely converted to the Protestant faith.
This is one of the moments in the 16th century that leads to the fracturing of Christianity and to much of the bloodshed and the wars that especially the later 16th century was known for.
As man explored the planet, a scientific revolution was also underway. By the mid-17th century, navigators had mapped much of the world in remarkable detail.
Rio de Janeiro, Cusco, Mexico City.
Galileo turned his eyes and his telescope on the heavens. Here, from 1612, are his drawings of sunspots. For his insistence that the sun is the center of the universe and the earth moves round it, the church branded him a heretic.
The Pope at the time, Pope Urban VIII, who was a very good friend of Galileo, said to him, look, I agree with you, you're right, but I can't approve of this because I'm the Pope, and if I go against this, it looks as if I'm going against the Bible, and I'm going to shake to the foundation the belief of the world and the world's Christians, not just Catholics.
Just 380 years later, in 1992, Pope John Paul II apologized for the Galileo affair. His successor, Benedict XVI, has sought middle ground in the centuries-old skirmishes between the church and science. In a recent sermon, he said, even the Big Bang theory of the creation of the universe is not in conflict with faith because God's mind was behind it.
This is the tricky part.
And backstage at the Pope's library, science is brought to bear on crumbling books as restoration workers deal with water damage, mold, and the ravages of time. It seems endless, this work.
Yes, obviously.
Angela Gaitan and the others go inch by inch, patching and strengthening ancient pages, scratching off paste put on by well-meaning restorers centuries ago. Paste that's turning acid, eating away at the page. Mario Tiburzi seldom reads what he's repairing. It's too distracting, especially if the writer happens to be Michelangelo.
When I work on the Michelangelo papers, it was the same that to work on Mickey Mouse paper.
Mickey Mouse, huh? A difficult job may take months or even years, but consider the result.
1,000 years after us, I hope that they can read the same thing that we are reading now.
The library's most valued documents go back almost 2,000 years, nearly to the time of St. Peter, the first pope whose tomb lies beneath the basilica that bears his name.
Petru Episcopou.
His letters to the faithful make up 2 books of the New Testament. And here is a copy, written in Greek on papyrus by one of Peter's disciples around the year 200, a mere century or so after his death.
In the beginning, it was the Word, and the Word was God.
And from the same period, the Gospel of Luke and part of the Gospel of John, also written on papyrus, venerated by early Christians in Egypt, preserved for centuries in a desert monastery.
The bread for today give us.
They contain the oldest known copy of the Lord's Prayer, so fragile we were only allowed to see replicas.
That great treasure of papyrus, I think, is the most important treasure of Christianity.
With our tour nearly over, it seemed as if the library's collection had come to life in the streets of the Eternal City. The centurions and crusaders, the centuries of faith and folly, time present and time past. Leaving the library, we thought, there's something almost magical to be immersed in this place, to breathe the air and touch the hand of history. You're about to see a remarkable footnote to history, a film made more than 100 years ago on Market Street, San Francisco's main thoroughfare. In fascinating detail, it shows how people lived and traveled and dressed in what was then, as now, the Golden City of the American West. The film is well known to historians, but who made it and why? And most important, exactly when? For a century, time, like the fog that blankets San Francisco, has shrouded the answers. But now we know. The film is a time traveler's glimpse of a joyous city on the brink of disaster. Our trip into the past begins on a San Francisco streetcar built in 1895.
It still comes out once in a while and carries passengers down the main street. It looks just like a cable car because it was built by the people who built the cable cars.
Our tour guide is Rick Labshire of the Market Street Railway, a nonprofit group that keeps the city's vintage trolleys rolling.
This is the main artery of San Francisco and always has been.
Market Street is 3 miles long, 120 feet wide. The beating heart of the city since the days of the gold rush.
This is where the original film started, right here about 8th Street.
Right here is where the past comes alive, thanks to a camera mounted on the front of a cable car a century ago, catching glimpses of fashion, faces, and the helter-skelter of city traffic, horses, trolley cars, and that new devil's own invention, the motor car.
You can see when people turn to look at the camera, it was really the shock of the new. Can you imagine? Here comes this contraption down the street with these guys hand cranking this camera furiously.
Others had made films of San Francisco starting in the 1890s, but this cameraman had the good sense to simply turn it on and leave it on. When you saw that film, what did you make of the people, the newsboys, the cars, the horses, everything all happening at once right here on the track?
Yeah, I mean, you can see that people would circulate wildly and they're just kind of wandering across the street. You have these huge drays led by teamsters with 4, sometimes 8 horses hauling along.
And it seems, watching the film, that there were absolutely no traffic rules.
It seems like it. Sort of people, it was optional to stay to the right. But, you know, it seemed to be honored in the breach. People will tell you today that Market Street is still that way.
Looking back a century from the same spot on the same street is an eerie sight. Teddy Roosevelt was president then. Life expectancy was 47 years for men, 50 for women, most of whom still couldn't vote. And no one, man, woman, or child, went out without a hat. The last few blocks of Market Street today, banks and brokers, it's Wall Street West. A century ago, the wholesale district offering coffee, tea, and spices, a time when a decent salary was $400 a year, a time reborn on film.
It's left us an astonishing record, the likes of which we rarely see. Quality.
Film archivist and historian Rick Prelinger owns the clearest of the 3 surviving copies of the film.
This is over 100 years old, but the image quality is just absolutely excellent.
How fragile is this?
Extremely.
This is a digitally restored, high-definition copy seen here for the first time on television. What is it that moves us so when we see something like this?
It's uncanny. First off, to see something that's so old, and almost an alternate universe, really. I love when the little kid is in the carriage ahead of the streetcar and opens up that curtain and peeks out. And then at the very, very end, the streetcar turns around and you have a glimpse of newsboys looking at the camera and waving just for a few frames. It dazzles audiences. People applaud this film.
It ends here, at the ferry building on San Francisco Bay. The movie is a small gem about a much larger gem, this magnificent city on the hills. But it's more even than that. It's a mystery quite literally ripped, as they say, from the headlines of the past.
It just seemed like it was an important enough film that something must have been written about it somewhere, and why not try and figure it out? I'm like that.
David Keane is another movie historian, a man obsessed with unlocking the secrets of the Market Street film, who spent days, weeks, months at the San Francisco Library scanning old newspapers for clues. Judging from the state of the construction on the various buildings along the way, the Library of Congress had dated the film to September of 1905. Screening it over and over, Keane wasn't so sure.
There's some water between the tracks there, reflection.
The film showed puddles from a recent rain. But the San Francisco newspapers from September 1905 showed no rain at all.
Clear, zero precipitation.
More clues came from the surprising number of cars. There were only a few thousand of them in the whole country in those days, and it appears the drivers on Market Street were recruited to fill up the screen, circling round the camera to make the city look more lively. Was that one of the cars registrations you were able to identify?
J. Barry Anway, who was a chauffeur at this time.
Keane checked old car licenses and registration records and discovered the chauffeur's car, number 4867, was registered in January 1906. Another one, number 5057, registered in February of 1906, suggesting the film was made some time after that. Keane went back to the 1906 newspapers and found,
starting around mid-March and going to the end of the month, there was quite a bit of rain.
Enough to account for the puddles and to push the likely time the film was made into April 1906. On April 18, 1906, as depicted in this painting, the great San Francisco earthquake struck. It and the subsequent fire killed thousands. Was there a eureka moment when you say, aha, it was not 1905, it was spring of 1906?
Well, certainly seeing the New York Clipper articles, that was I think the defining moment. Dramatic vaudeville circus.
The New York Clipper was a showbiz paper where actors, jugglers, songwriters, and movie makers advertised their wares, and where Keane found a series of ads from the Miles brothers, filmmakers offering movie houses a travelogue called A Trip Through Market Street. This ad from April 28, 1906, 10 days after the quake.
We have the only pictures of any value ever made in San Francisco. Before the frightful catastrophe.
This strongly suggests the film was made just before the earthquake.
Yeah, well, it actually spells it out exactly right here. This film was made just 1 week before the complete destruction of every building shown in the picture.
New research this summer confirmed that. Keane had stripped away the haze of history to show us the real story behind the trip through Market Street. San Francisco closing in on its rendezvous with catastrophe. The odds are some of the people you see had just days to live. When you look at that film, all you can think of is what was about to happen.
It takes on a power that is almost inconceivable, because you can look at the buildings and know with certainty that almost all disappeared. You can look at the people on the street and wonder who survived. You're watching a shade fall over an era.
This is Market Street after the quake and fire. Among the buildings destroyed, the offices of the Miles brothers. Their film of San Francisco in happier days barely survived. They'd shipped it to New York by train just the night before the quake.
Knowing that it was our relatives that did that, we were very proud.
Scott Miles and his uncle Dwayne are descendants of Earl Miles, the man who supervised the filming. They have one of his cameras and a family album of still pictures the Miles brothers took of the damage and the city's refugees. But they never knew the Miles brothers made the Market Street film until David Keane uncovered the story.
David Keane just produced so much wonderful information for us, and we're astounded.
What is it about the trip down Market Street? Why do you think people are so moved by it?
I just see the people there, and they don't know what's about to hit them. And you can't help but feel for them.
Yeah, it's just how vulnerable we are.
As for the man who figured it all out, he was armed only with a computer, the internet, and an incurable curiosity.
Here's some film that we found up in the projection booth.
Keane understands well the strange power of images from the past. In the California town of Niles, a throwback itself to a gentler age, Keane runs a theater devoted to silent films. Charlie Chaplin himself made movies in Niles and watched them in this very room, where this night, the film to which David Keane gave new meaning, A Trip Through Market Street, is the star attraction.
That's the beauty of film. It captures something that nobody today is seeing anymore. It makes a connection. Young and old, they still react with amazement to it.
And 30 miles across San Francisco Bay, the ferry building still welcomes travelers. And Market Street, a century later, rolls on and on.
You have heard of Pompeii, the ancient Roman city destroyed when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD. Less well known is the neighboring city of Herculaneum, also buried by the volcano. When the city was rediscovered in the 1700s, excavators found what could be the richest repository of ancient Western wisdom, a library filled with papyrus scrolls. Scholars think there could be unknown Greek and Latin masterpieces, possibly early Christian writings, even the first references to Jesus. The problem is, the volcanic heat left the scrolls so charred and brittle, no one has been able to open them without breaking them into pieces. We heard 3 scholars might finally have found a way to unravel the mystery of the scrolls. So we traveled to Italy to see what we could uncover about the Scrolls of Herculaneum. The Italian city of Ercolano sits along the Bay of Naples on the western slope of Mount Vesuvius. The city bustles with the chaos of Italian traffic and the easy flow of Italian life. It's not a wealthy place, but beneath these narrow streets lies buried treasure, the ancient Roman seaside town of Herculaneum, entombed along with Pompeii in 79 AD. The modern city is built on top of the ancient city.
There's no archaeological site in the world that matches this.
We went to Herculaneum with Andrew Wallace Hadrill, founding director of the Herculaneum Conservation Project. He showed us around the excavation site in all its ghostly grandeur.
So what do you think is going on here? Were they trying to escape, or were they hiding?
In my view, they're not trying to get away by sea. They're simply trying to take shelter under these vaults.
Vesuvius blasted the town with successive massive surges of heat and ash for 24 hours.
Those surges, they kill all human life and all other forms of life. And then wave after wave, they begin to build up these layers of ash that compacts into rock.
Until we have this.
Yeah.
80 feet of...
80 foot of solid rock.
That ended up preserving this place so well.
Yeah. The paradox is that catastrophic destruction is also exceptionally good preservation.
Preserving Herculaneum like a fossil in amber. Everything frozen in time, forgotten for nearly 17 centuries, until, legend has it, a farmer digging a well struck the past.
They've built a really big public building here.
Hadrill told us Herculaneum was like the Malibu of the Roman Empire, oasis for the elite. Early excavators discovered this once opulent villa. Today, it looks like a cave. In 79 AD, it looked like this. The Getty Villa in Malibu, California, is a recreation of the summer retreat thought to belong to the family of Julius Caesar. Tunneling around in the ancient villa in Italy, early treasure hunters dug out statues and riches enough to fill a grand room in the Naples Museum. But the greatest treasures don't look valuable at all. These are the papyrus scrolls of Herculaneum, 1,800 ancient books written on sheets of plant fiber, flash-seared by the volcanic heat, found in the only remaining intact library from the ancient world.
So where was the library?
The library was there.
The precarious villa excavation site is off-limits to the public, but Massimo Ossana, former administrator of Herculaneum and Pompeii, took us deep inside.
The library itself has not been excavated like this.
No.
He said there could be hundreds more scrolls yet to be unearthed.
Back in here, in the library.
It's a possibility. Maybe Aristotle. Who knows?
Aristotle.
Yeah.
Euripides.
Yeah.
Virgil.
For example.
Scholars have been trying desperately to open the scrolls since they were discovered.
The history of the unwrapping of the Herculaneum scrolls is littered with failures. Everyone who had tried to open the scrolls had left behind a hideous trail of fragmentary result.
Brent Seals, a brash computer scientist from the New World, the University of Kentucky to be precise, had what he thought was a brilliant idea to solve the 2,000-year-old mystery. Use modern medical imaging technology.
People were going to the doctor every day and they were doing a CT scan or an MRI and they were seeing inside their body completely non-invasively. If you can do that to a human in the doctor's office, why couldn't we see inside a scroll? That was the thinking.
Didn't think it was that far-fetched.
No.
In the arcane world where academics spend their entire careers poring over fragments of ancient texts, Brent Seals is a superstar. He made his name digitally restoring damaged medieval manuscripts with software he had designed. A colleague told him about the Scrolls of Herculaneum, most housed at the Library of Naples, a few others in France and England. He considered them the ultimate challenge.
The people are gone, the cultures are gone, the places are gone, and yet, like a time capsule, you have this item that tells a story.
All locked away in that thing that looks like a little lump of charcoal.
They're all locked away.
He knew imaging technology could only reveal a jumble of letters like this. To actually read the scrolls, he'd have to unroll them, much like this medieval French scroll at the Morgan Library in Manhattan. But he'd have to do this virtually. After years of trial and error, he and his students thought they'd cracked the code with algorithms and software. He was cocky enough to announce at Oxford to an international conference of scholars who study ancient papyrus that he could do what no one else had done.
I swung for the fence. I gave him a talk where I said, I think we can read everything inside the Herculaneum scrolls without opening them.
Did you think the papyrologists would come running to you with their scrolls and say, here, take a look at these?
I smile now because that is exactly what I thought.
Didn't happen?
No.
So how hard is it to get your hands on these scrolls?
I would say somewhere in the vicinity of nigh, near impossible.
That's because they're so rare and so fragile, curators are reluctant to let anyone handle them, including a superstar like Brent Seales. They wouldn't relent even after he published a paper theorizing a better way to peer inside the scrolls, with this, a synchrotron, a super powerful X-ray generated by electrons racing around this ring at almost the speed of light. There are only about 50 in the world. This one is in Britain. The X-ray is this green beam, 100 billion times stronger than any hospital X-ray. Maybe it's coincidence, but shortly after Seales published his pioneering paper,
just to give you an idea,
2 Italian scholars stepped forward and claimed they had had the same idea to use a synchrotron. Vito Micella, a physicist from Naples, says he first learned about the scrolls as a child.
I cannot remember exactly the age, but 9, 10.
And Graziano Ranocchia, a papyrologist. He studies ancient Roman papyrus. He pores over bits of Herculaneum scrolls at the Naples Library. Most are fragments of Greek philosophy.
I'm coming here and working on this papyri every day.
Call it academic competition, call it ego, but American Brent Seales, Ranocchia, the papyrologist, and Italian physicist Micella became fierce competitors, all fighting to make history as the first to reveal the contents of the scrolls. A gladiatorial wrestling match in the hallowed halls of the Ivory Tower. Ranocchia accuses Micella of sabotaging his research. Seales is convinced the Italians poached his idea to use the synchrotron. The mystery of the scrolls is playing out like some tragic Italian opera.
You know, they say, Bill, that the reason academics argue is because the stakes are so low, right? The stakes actually are really high. If you think about the possibility of revealing these manuscripts to the world from 2,000 years ago that no one's ever read. And okay, so now we're going to argue with each other? Really? I mean, maybe we could do that later, after we've read them.
But the 2 Italian rivals used their European connections and convinced curators to let each of them, and only them, have limited access to a few scrolls to scan with the synchrotron. They leapfrogged over American Brent Seales and raced to this one in Grenoble, France. Micella got there first. It was hard for us to make out, but he said his scan revealed letters.
These are letters?
Sì. Queste sono lettere.
Yes, he said, these are letters. Micella won international praise and headlines as the first person to see inside one of the ancient scrolls of Herculaneum. When papyrologist Ranocchia scanned his scrolls, he said he did Micella one better.
Has anyone else found anything as clear as this?
Nothing like this.
He said he saw phrases.
Pace theia, namely they would be persuaded. This is a...
Would be persuaded.
Yeah,
That's
right.
Brent Seales is not persuaded.
You don't believe that?
Hey, I engage in wishful thinking all the time. But at the end of the day, I'm a scientist, and wishful thinking is not what science is based on. I was unable to replicate their results, and so far I've not heard from anyone who's been able to replicate them.
But with their findings published in scientific journals, the Italian scholars savored their achievements. Micella considers Brent Seales' criticism sour grapes.
Brent Seales looked at your latest findings and he says he doesn't see any letters.
I know. I don't know why.
You don't know why?
I don't know why.
I guess my threshold is somewhat different. When I see writing, you know, it should line up. It should be more than a letter or two. You ought to be able to see text that looks like something you can actually read.
Since he couldn't get access to the Herculaneum scrolls, Seales looked elsewhere to prove his algorithms and software. That led him to Jerusalem and this charred fragment, a 1,700-year-old scroll from a burned synagogue near the Dead Sea.
Is there a line up here?
Israeli archaeologists didn't expect much, but what Seal software revealed was like a miracle.
What was it?
Well, it was the Bible.
He resurrected all the surviving Hebrew script, the oldest text of the Bible as we know it today.
The first 2 chapters of Leviticus in a scroll that prior to that was assumed to be nothing or so badly damaged no one would ever know.
This is what you would hope to see in the Herculaneum scrolls?
Absolutely. I mean, this is actually an identifiable text.
Following his breakthrough in Jerusalem, even Graziano Ranocchia admits Brent Seal's software is brilliant. Now, the Naples Library, which wouldn't let Seals get his hands on the scrolls, is considering granting him access. He is convinced the secrets of Herculaneum, locked away in the scrolls for 2,000 years, are just within reach.
If you want to start a spirited debate at your next holiday meal, ask your guests which country invented wine. France, Italy, or Greece might come to mind. But most scholars say Georgia, the small former Soviet republic, is the birthplace of wine. Scientists say wine residue found on pieces of pottery in Georgia dates back 8,000 years. The country, of nearly 4 million, shares a border with Russia and has survived thousands of years of invasions and wars. Multiple dynasties have come and gone, but somehow many Georgian grapes survived. Tonight, we'll take you on a journey through Georgia to meet the promoters and protectors of Georgia's ancient vines. When you first set foot in Georgia's capital, Tbilisi, she's hard to miss. Perched high up over the city, the towering mother of Georgia wields a sword in her right hand to fend off her enemies and a bowl of wine in her left to welcome friends. That welcome and the country's deep history of winemaking winds through Georgia. The vines of city dwellers cling to tiny balconies. Small family vineyards stretch along the countryside. And larger producers export millions of bottles globally. But to fully understand the rich history of wine in Georgia, we went to the fertile river valley of Kakheti to see the Alaverdi Monastery. At the foot of the Caucasus Mountains, the monastery looks like a fortress. We were invited inside its walls. Our host was Georgian Orthodox Bishop David. He oversees 3 monks who live on the grounds of the medieval compound. It is a quiet life, committed to God and the godly pursuit of creating a perfect glass of wine.
How many bottles of wine do you make here a year?
20,000 bottles with a maximum of 50,000 bottles. Our wine cellar's capacity is 30 tons of wine.
4 monks, 20,000 bottles. This is a lot of work. Do they ever sleep?
We sleep and work at the same time.
Locals help work the land. But for centuries, the monks have been the guardians of these ancient vines. The monastery dates back to the 6th century. Bishop David told us vines were planted on day 1.
Does making wine make you feel closer to God?
Of course. Whenever we are in the vineyard or the wine cellar, we always feel that God is close to us.
Grapes have long held a sacred place in Georgia. In ancient times, wine was considered a divine drink and offered to the gods to win favor. Georgian soldiers tied a piece of grapevine inside the chest of their uniforms to protect them and to assure that if they died in battle, a vine would sprout from their heart. Man was mortal, but Georgian vines eternal. For centuries, the Georgian monks have made wine the same way, producing reds, whites, and even ambers. More on that in a moment. The process is uniquely Georgian. Under the monastery, buried 6 feet deep in the ground, giant clay pots called qvevri are used to ferment, store, and age the wine. It is the traditional way to make wine in Georgia. Many homes have qvevris in their cellar. But today, there are only a handful of qvevri makers who carry on the tradition of hand-building these clay beasts. Some hold nearly 900 gallons of wine. Pressed grapes, skins, stalks, and the juice are all mixed into the qvevri, which is buried in the ground to maintain a constant temperature. Every day during the harvest, the monks make their way through the hallowed halls of the monastery to bless the wine cellar, the grapes, and toast the bounty their vineyards bring. Most of the monks' wine is sold. Some is shared during Sunday communion inside the Isle of Eigg Cathedral. On this day, a haunting chant stirred inside the cathedral dome. The chant, called "You Are the Vineyard," was written 900 years ago by a former king turned monk to honor Georgia's deep connection to its religion and wine. Lit by candles, it's hard to see the scars of the cathedral. It survived earthquakes and invasions. In an attempt to erase Georgian culture, Russians whitewashed the cathedral interiors in the 20th century, covering up 11th century frescoes, and used the monastery's qvevris to store their gasoline. But miraculously, many of the vines were unharmed. Bishop David says today, 100 grape varieties, some dating back 900 years, are still grown on the monastery's grounds.
And how does the wine taste?
Not to talk about taste, it's better to taste it ourselves.
Sitting near the ancient qvevris, the bishop opened a bottle.
When tasting the qvevri wine for the first time, a person might think they are trying something very different.
Ooh, it does look golden. Amber. Look at that color.
And they say in Georgia that the eye drinks and the eye eats. That's what we have to thankful to God.
There's much to be thankful to God about in this glass.
Of course, it could not be any other way.
Heavenly, with notes of citrus, spices, and honey. It is complex, like the history of Georgia, but in a glass. Georgia's future is also tied to its wines, inspiring chefs like Takuna Gachichi Lodze.
How much is wine a part of the story of this country?
This is, the question, wine or food or wine, It's so together because we don't imagine our everyday life without the wine. And the wine, it's one of the most important part in our history and our culture and in food also.
49-year-old Takuna wasn't supposed to be a chef. While pursuing a psychology degree in New York, she was working at a restaurant and fell in love with both the chef and cooking. She dropped the psych degree and the chef and enrolled in culinary school in Manhattan. A master chef, Takuna is now known as the godmother of Georgia's culinary evolution. She runs the popular Cafe La Terra in the capital of Tbilisi, a restaurant known for its adventuresome menu and wine pairings.
You're credited with revolutionizing Georgian cuisine. How have Georgians responded to that?
I just started to experiment, and then I also started to do new recipes based on the traditional ones, and then give this choice, to people. And in the beginning, it was big resistance. The people think you have to keep tradition and untouched. But for me, tradition is always innovation, because every dish was somehow innovative when it started.
Georgia sits at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. A Georgian dinner can look and taste like a trip around the world.
All these influences, starting from China, even from America to the Europe, it's gathered here. It was a hub. And that's why our cuisine, traditional cuisine, it was always fusion. So
Georgia was fusion before fusion was fusion.
Exactly. And also because so many invasions, and we were always under the rule of different countries. And this brought these different tastes and the spices and also cooking methods. This is all yours.
Oh, gosh. Perfect.
Culinary clashes are my favorite kind of conflicts to cover. I reported for duty at the dinner table.
That's amazing. Yes, it's beautiful.
This is our first dish, like an appetizer. It's called phalis, the vegetables with walnuts. We cook in Georgia lots with the walnuts.
Walnuts are one of the workhorses of Georgian cuisine, pulverized and used the same way the French use butter, to make everything creamier. Not surprisingly, grape leaves are also a favorite ingredient.
This is tolma, and you can't imagine any table without this dish.
Our dinner included 5 courses with 6 dishes, each with a different glass of wine.
We have this like a filet mignon.
Do you have a couch that I can recline on?
Yes.
Chef Takuna insisted we taste everything because the wines came from different regions and each had its own unique flavor.
We have so many great winemakers, and it is like a new revolution, and not losing the old traditions. They improve it and then continue doing the great wines.
But there is no wine more distinctly Georgian than this.
You see the difference
Look at
of
the
the
color of
colors?
this.
Yeah. That's why it's called amber.
Not orange.
Yeah, no.
Not orange.
Never orange.
No.
Americans know what to do with red wine. We know what to do with white wine. But if you put an amber wine out, I would not know what I should be serving that with.
Actually, this is what's very interesting. Amber wine, it's like a universal wine. You can drink with the vegetables, you can drink with meat, but this is what makes it unique, You can pair almost with everything.
It's versatile. So I noticed you said you don't like to eat when you're cooking, but you will have a sip, right?
But I drink.
Fine, then you can stay.
2 hours later, the warmth of Georgian hospitality, or perhaps all that wine, washed over us.
It's like a Georgian saying that the guests are from the gods. So you have to treat the guest like you treat the gods.
We usually hear about guests from hell, but guests from the gods sounds a lot better.
In Georgia, we got guests are really from the gods. Cheers.
When we come back, you'll meet a guest who came to Georgia for the culture, food, and wine 25 years ago and never left. Today, he's credited with helping to put Georgian wines on the map and menus around the world. When most of us order wine, we look for a favorite variety, consider the region, the age, or perhaps the cost. But ordering a glass of wine from Georgia can be a bit more complicated. The former Soviet bloc nation is the size of West Virginia, but offers more than 40 varieties of wine, each with a tongue-twisting name from vines centuries old. Still, Georgian wine is gaining popularity beyond the country's borders. Last year, nearly 1.5 million bottles of it were shipped to the United States, an increase of nearly 30% from the previous year. We headed to Georgia's wine country to get a taste for ourselves. Stretched along eastern Georgia, more than 4,000 square miles of vineyards sit at the base of its mountains like a welcome mat. This is the Kakheti region. 3/4 of the grapes used to make wine in Georgia are grown here. In the middle of one of Kakheti's hundreds of vineyards, we met an unlikely ambassador of Georgian wine, an American, 47-year-old John Werdeman.
How does an American end up with all of this?
Well, it started with a curiosity for a country that the more I learned about it, the more fascinating it was, and nobody seemed to know anything about it, at least in my world.
Werdeman grew up a world away in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He was studying art in Russia when he visited neighboring Georgia. He liked it so much, he moved here, and in 2006 bought a 62-acre rundown vineyard, hired locals, and started Pheasant's Tears Winery. Georgia is the birthplace of wine. The mild climate and rich soil have made it an ideal place to grow hundreds of varieties of grapes for thousands of years. At one time, the country reportedly had more than 1,400 indigenous grape varieties. Most were wiped out during the Soviet era, when quantity replaced diversity. John Werdeman is part of a national effort to recultivate Georgia's ancient vines and bring them back to life.
So in Soviet times, out of 525 varieties, you had roughly 4 or 5 that were the main ones that were commercially available.
So what happened to the rest?
Luckily, Georgians were still growing them in their backyard. They were allowed to have small private plots for their own personal use, and they kept the ancestral varieties going. So when we wanted to start to bring back these ancient varieties together with our friends, that was where we were going. We were going to the individual backyards of farmers that kept growing the varieties that their grandfathers and great-grandfathers had kept alive.
Clawing back all of the grape varieties is something Georgians take seriously, a kind of declaration of independence from their former Soviet rulers. In 2014, the Georgian government opened 2 research centers to locate, study, and grow those rare grape vines. Scientists head into the vineyards once a week to gather critical data. DNA of grape leaves is analyzed. Juice is extracted in the field and then tested in labs for disease. Healthy vines are replanted. Today, there are more than 500 native grape varieties growing in Georgia. At Pheasant's Tears, ancient Georgian methods are used to make the wine. Stems, skins, and juice are all mixed together, then poured in giant qvevris buried deep underground and sealed with clay, where the mixture ferments and ages.
This is our lower qvevri level.
Is all the wine here made in qvevris?
Most all of it. There's a couple of wines we'll be tasting later that are on the fresher, lighter side from Western Georgia that we use stainless steel, but everything of structure.
So based on where they are, they have a different taste?
Yeah, if they're in a space that breathes versus a reductive space.
The wine typically remains inside the qvevris for 9 months.
This is where we age the wines.
Then it's bottled and stored in a cellar.
So when are these bottles from?
These are from the last 15 years, but it allows us to understand how the wines develop and what is the most ideal time and for releasing.
Nothing is rushed in Georgia, something we witnessed during lunchtime at the vineyard.
For the harvest of 2023, may it be healthy and long living.
Workers were celebrating the harvest with a traditional Georgian feast called a supra, a lavish meal typically held after weddings, funerals, baptisms, and births. During our lunch, guests broke into song. This is a traditional Georgian folk song, centuries old. A few guests started dancing. Lunch hour stretched into dinner. And then came the toasts.
For children, and for the children that are continuing the tradition.
A half dozen of them before dessert.
With so many toasts, so many songs and dancing, it's amazing anybody eats.
Yeah, but the supras last for quite a long time. If workers go out to work for a few hours in the field and they come back together, they'll have a supra and they'll have toasts about the things that mean the most to them in life. For Georgian winemaking, for the grapes, the history, the vessel, the varieties, and the songs that were built around the feast. Some people have called the Georgian supra an academy, where basically people come together in order to share what they know and to learn from one another.
But John Werdeman says schooling the rest of the world on Georgian wines hasn't been so easy. First, there are at least 40 varieties of Georgian wines being served around the world, and even the most sophisticated sommelier might struggle to just pronounce them. Saperavi, Casatelli, and Mitzvani don't exactly roll off the tongue. Then there's the issue of that unusual color, the giant ginger elephant in the glass.
I've noticed a couple people we've spoken to here, when you say orange wine, they shudder a little bit and say, it's amber. Is there any difference?
No, in terms of modern wine syntax, they're synonyms. But I was also a little bit part of the early conversations where when we were talking about orange wine from Georgia, people worried, is this some sort of citrus concoction being sold outside of Atlanta?
What is it that creates that beautiful color?
So you're basically leaving the must or the juice of the grapes with skins, the pips, and sometimes the stems. Basically extracting both pigment as well as phenolic structure from the skins. So that's changing the flavor as well as the color. But it's also, a lot of our preconceptions can affect how we perceive the wine. Because if you were to show them that same wine in a black glass, they might say, what a delightfully refreshing light red. But when they see it from a white grape, they think, is this somehow a bit clumsy or rustic, or why? You know, this doesn't taste like my Sauvignon Blanc that I'm used to drinking.
A little frustrating.
A friend of mine who's a master of wine in London has a beautiful saying that she gave at a conference once. She said, the orange or amber wines of Georgia are not the mean sisters of whites, but the introspective cousins of reds.
But over the last decade, the Georgian family of wines, reds, whites, and even ambers, have been embraced around the globe. Last year, Georgia exported over 140 million bottles of wine to more than 65 countries.
What do you attribute to that kind of growth?
I think in the very beginning, we were walking around with maps and photographs and saying that, no, we're not, swarthy versions of Russians, but Georgians have their own language, their own wine culture, their own culinary culture, history that is very ancient, and, try the wines. But it took a fair amount of effort to get people to give us the benefit of the doubt and even to try.
Over the past decade, more than 2,000 new vineyards have taken root in the country. And last year, Georgian winemakers made more than $100 million.
All of a sudden, it's like watching a black and white picture of a rainbow come to color again. This diversity and expanse of color is coming back to the Georgian table after sleeping for almost a few centuries.
For Georgians, it's another reason to celebrate. For the rest of the world, it's a chance to taste history.
Every now and then, just for the fun of it, we decide to go off to some obscure place that you've never heard of and are not likely to visit. Tonight, we're taking you to Eigg, or the People's Republic of Eigg, as it's jokingly referred to, in Scotland, a country where half the privately held land is owned by fewer than 500 people. A lot of it is tied up in huge estates owned by lairds, who often run them as fiefdoms. 20 years ago, after 2 centuries of servility, the people of Eigg drove away their laird and seized control of their own destiny, establishing the first community-owned estate in Scotland's history. We wanted to see what they've made of it.
Just 3 miles wide, 6 miles long, and 10 miles off the Scottish coast, Eigg is part of the Inner Hebrides, surrounded by the Isles of Rum, Muck, and Skye at the edge of the North Atlantic. It's an ungroomed masterpiece of nature, too wild to tame, a craggy isle of incredible beauty populated mostly by sheep and the dogs that keep track of them. The people do their best to stay clear while taking everything in.
So what's your average day like?
Some people would say very lazy. I like to think I just make the hard work look easy. All depends on your outlook.
Charlie Galley is the taxi driver on Eigg and the only source of public transportation up and down the island's furrowed main artery. It's a niche he claimed for himself when he arrived from the mainland with his wife in this aging Volvo 4 years ago. Plenty of time to get the feel of the place.
You know everybody on the island?
I know them and their shoe sizes, and like I say, there's no secrets on an island, so...
So what are they talking about this week?
Mainly you.
It's not like they don't get visitors. 12,000 tourists came here last year, most of them to spend only a few hours. There are very few places to stay. We were going to be here for days, asking questions about Egg's quirky history. And everyone directed us to Maggie Fife, the island secretary, who landed here 41 years ago after touring Afghanistan in a camper.
I never imagined that I would spend the rest of my life here.
Does that mean you like it?
I think so, yeah.
It was 1976, just after the entire island had been purchased by a wealthy English toff named Keith Schellenberg, who became the 7th Laird of Eigg.
Welcome to Eigg.
Under Scotland's feudal landlord system, he had absolute power over virtually every aspect of his estate.
What kind of impact did he have on people's lives?
He had that control over everything, and people, jobs, houses, and he wouldn't give anybody a lease on anything.
By all accounts, Schellenberg used the island as his personal playground, lavishly entertaining guests and driving about in a 1927 Rolls-Royce, while most of his tenants lived in poverty without electricity.
Was there a rebellion?
Eventually, yeah.
It started with a slow burn that burst into flames one night in 1994, when Schellenberg's beloved Rolls-Royce met a fiery end, burnt to a crisp like a slice of bacon under circumstances still unexplained.
A mysterious fire, spontaneous combustion, who knows?
So did you ever figure out what happened to the Rolls-Royce?
No.
Headline writers all over Britain couldn't believe their luck. There was scrambled egg, burnt rolls, and egg comes to the boil. It went on for a year until Schellenberg gave up, expressing his disdain for the islanders in this BBC interview.
I think that my ultimate failure with Egg is that I can't be bothered to try and get on with them anymore.
His final act was to sell the island to a wacky German who called himself Maruma and claimed to be an artist of note and a professor. He turned out to be neither. Up to his beret in debt, Maruma stopped paying people's wages, and within 2 years, creditors put Egg up for auction. Maggie Fife and others thought, why not buy the island for ourselves?
By the time we got to Maruma, and 2 years of somebody that was living in Stuttgart and had only visited for 4 days, it had convinced everybody that we wouldn't have to do very much to do better than what he'd done, which was nothing.
No one in Scotland had ever tried a community buyout before, certainly not 64 residents on a depressed, undeveloped island with no cash or credit. But lots of people were familiar with their story and fancied the idea of wee folk taking on the big guys. In 1997, a public fundraising campaign brought in $2.5 million to close the deal. The funds came from 10,000 individual contributors and one huge check from an unknown woman.
The bulk of the money came from a mystery benefactor.
A mystery benefactor? Sounds like Dickens.
It's a pretty crazy story, really.
You don't know who she is?
The only string attached was that she remained anonymous.
She ever been to the island?
Not as far as I know.
Do you know why she did it?
I think she's given money to a lot of what she regards as good causes, and we were lucky enough to be one of them.
That was 20 years ago. The Eggers and their friends marked the 2 decades of self-rule with a big blowout they call a ceilidh, with traditional music, dancing, and drink. We decided to cancel the next day's shoot to allow time for recovery, but 24 hours wasn't enough.
What time did you leave the ceilidh?
It's about 8 a.m. I think when we finally left, yeah.
How long did it take you to recover?
Probably tomorrow.
Johnny Jobson first experienced Egg in his 20s, working on a fishing boat as a scallop diver. Since then, a lot has changed. One, there is electricity now, which allowed him to move his wife and family here last year and edit a sports journal online from their tiny cottage. It's required some sacrifices, but they love the beauty of the place and its eccentricities.
You'll look at the scenery or you'll see a pod of dolphins come through and you just remind yourself how lucky you are.
You seem to have a lot of characters on this island.
Yeah.
Were they normal when they came here?
Yeah, not all of us.
Dean Wiggin turned up in a kayak 14 years ago, and he's still here. He's very good at fixing things. Jobs are extremely scarce, so you have to bring one with you or use your wits to invent one.
It's one of those places that really gets into your soul. I think it's quite enchanting.
Sarah Bowden runs her uncle's sheep farm on Eigg. She grew up here, then left to work as a music journalist in London, where she met her future partner, Johnny Lynch, one of Scotland's most popular musicians. She coaxed him to Eigg.
Did you think he was going to come?
Not really. No, because I was living in a caravan at the time, and it was all quite rustic.
Yeah, you did look a bit shocked.
And Johnny's, proper suburban city. What? Well, you're not an actual country boy, are you?
If you mean I look after my nails, then yes, I do. But I knew from as soon as I got here, I couldn't really see a reason for me to go back. And just look at me now.
Look at you now.
See if you can spell it.
When it comes to the essentials on Eigg, there is basically one of everything. One primary school for 5 students, one grocery shop where 100 islanders all choose from the same food, and one pub at the tea room down by the wharf, where the best beer is local. Stu McCarthy and Gabe McVarish, who are both married to women who grew up on Eigg, got so tired of drinking the mass-produced stuff from the mainland, they started their own mini microbrewery 2 years ago.
So this is it? Is this legal?
It's legal. It's legal.
They make 8 different brews, including I Am the Eggman, which is very popular with the tourists. They're just beginning to turn a profit, but say they've saved a lot of money drinking their own beer.
Are you the biggest selling beer on Eigg?
Thankfully, yes. Yeah, we can say that.
None of these younger people would be here without the island's tiny but unique power grid that runs almost entirely on renewable energy, a combination of wind, hydroelectric, and solar, the first time it's ever been accomplished anywhere.
That is the biggest and most impressive project that we've done.
It changed everything, right?
Oh yeah, it's made life so much easier.
It was designed and funded with multiple grants, mostly from the European Union, and engineers from all over the world have come to study it. Like everything else on Eigg, it is run and maintained by revolving committees of islanders, the only visible sign of any sort of government. There are no offices, no court system, no police.
Is there any crime on the island?
There's no crime or anything.
Never?
Not that I can remember.
Nobody's snatched something or borrowed something?
They borrow it, and you'll get it usually within the week, returned to you kind of thing. You just don't know where it is at that point in time when you're looking for it. But it will turn up again. It can't go anywhere. It's on an island, so yeah.
What happens if somebody gets sick?
Well, you basically have to be sick on a Tuesday. The doctor comes from Skye on a Tuesday, spends the day here. And that's sometimes weather permitting, if it's really rough in the winter time.
Eigg is dependent on boats for everything. When a ferry comes in with fuel and food, people flock to the wharf to help out. It's not a courtesy, it's a necessity on an island where everyone is more or less scraping by. To survive, they have to rely on each other, look after each other, and put up with each other. The island is too small for feuds or lingering resentments.
What's the difference between people who live on the mainland and people who live on Eigg?
Well, the people on Eigg, I'd have to say, are more evolved.
Charlie Galley, the taxi driver and amateur philosopher, says most people here have done the whole life on the mainland thing and rejected it.
They're all doing their hamster wheel thing,
Hamster wheel?
Yeah. You get a mortgage, you get a car, you do the job, or you do this and the next thing. And they all get so involved, they forget to look about them and see what's actually going on in life,
You should know Eigg is not always served sunny side up. As the days get shorter, the windy, rainy weather turns to sleet with gusts up to 100 miles an hour. The boats might not get through for a week, so people keep lots of beans and Spam in the storeroom. Even the sheepdogs look forlorn.
If you accidentally open your mouth when a gust of wind's coming, it involuntarily fills your lungs. You're like...
To live here, you have to be resilient, self-sufficient, and patient. And not just with the sheep.
The cows like to go down and lie on the beach, on the sand, and they'll all trail down the road, so you can't argue with a cow, you know. It wants to do what it wants to do, and you've just got to give it plenty of time, you know.
There are no grand ambitions here and no discernible interest in development, despite the sea, the cliffs, and the vistas. The owners don't want hotels or a Donald Trump golf course or hundreds of new residents.
I think we're looking for one or two at a time. I think that's how it works here. Then it works a lot better. And we've got time to get used to new people.
We would have liked to stay longer in this stress-free, non-conflict zone where everyone seems to be more or less on the same page. But we were out of clean laundry, we had a ferry to catch, and hamster wheels to jump back onto. As for the people of Eigg, I don't think they were sad to see us go.
Okay, name that country. It's planted opposite Europe, sitting proudly on the other side of the North Sea. It's a monarchy that features its own currency, postage stamps, constitution, national anthem, love of tea, and a pair of handsome princes born 2 years apart. We speak of Sealand, a crumb of real estate off the English coast that declared its independence in 1967. Sealand has a full-time population of 1. It has a landmass the size of roughly 2 tennis courts. Its leading export might be the national mythology, a history of piracy, coups, counter-coups, rogues, and offshore internet schemes. It may make tiny Liechtenstein look like China by comparison, but by rights, Sealand is a sovereign nation. Join us as we compile some notes from a truly small island.
We can see Sealand over there, by the way, now. You see that?
Oh, there she is.
Yeah. On the starboard bow.
Behold, the world's smallest state. It's a micronation in the extreme, a principality which sits, or stands, only 7 miles off the coast of England. Its self-described reigning monarch is this guy, Prince Michael Bates.
Here we are.
Yeah.
A platform and a couple of concrete husks, and
yeah,
this is a state.
Yep.
Enter some countries, you arrive in style. Here, you arrive in what's basically a backyard swing hoisted by a crank 60 feet above the North Sea. And if you're wondering about the safety regulations, yeah, us too. Then again, when you are a sovereign nation, you, by definition, set your own rules.
That's a hell of a way to get into a country.
The only way to travel.
On the plus side, there's no long line at the arrivals hall.
I'm following you to passport control.
Mike Barrington fills various roles and positions on Sealand. Right now, it's immigration and customs. He also happens to be the only permanent resident.
There you are, sir.
So now I'm official.
You are. Welcome to Sealand.
It wasn't always named Sealand, and it was never intended to be a country. Originally called His Majesty's Ruff's Tower, it was a hastily constructed nautical fort, one of several the British set up in the North Sea during World War II. Hi! Equipped with anti-aircraft artillery, these forts were designed to prevent German bombing raids on London. During the war, more than 100 Royal Marines were crammed into these towers for months on end. Descending the 7-story towers, it feels and smells like a cross between a treehouse and a diesel-soaked submarine. First up, the first-class bedroom suite.
Yeah. It's a nice one.
Yeah, nice TV.
Our claustrophobic tour continued downward.
Now we're underwater at this point. Yeah. So we've still got a couple floors to go.
Yeah, you hear ships going past. You hear the propellers going around. Ding, 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 ding.
Like many countries, there's a national cathedral.
You have freedom of worship in Sealand. I think there's even the Quran here somewhere.
On the bottom floor, the jail.
2 days in the brig, bread and water.
I have to look at the Sealand Constitution and see what my rights are.
Very limited at the moment.
If you're wondering by now how this concrete island constitutes a country, stick with us here.
This is Radio Caroline on 199.
Back in the 1960s, these same waters played host to the burgeoning, unlicensed commercial radio business that operated on ships and old forts, what the British government called pirate radio. It was the time of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Kinks. But the stodgy BBC, which had a monopoly on broadcasting in Britain, gave the rock bands just an hour of airtime a week. The younger set in Britain, millions of them, tuned their radio knobs to the pirate stations. In 1965, Prince Michael's father, Roy Bates, an enterprising, swashbuckling World War II veteran, commandeered a fort where another pirate station operated. It was the Wild West on the North Sea.
The DJs may not be highly experienced, but they certainly pull their weight.
Bates set up Britain's first 24-hour outfit. He called it Radio Essex.
You're in tune with Radio Essex broadcasting on 222 meters.
We're doing a job that's needed. The public want us to do the job, so do businesses. And I think while this demand is here, we'll remain in business.
But not for long. The British government enacted a new law rendering all pirate radio stations illegal. Bates was forced to shut down, but true to his nature, he was something other than scared off.
He just would not back down.
Form of surrender? If he had said, you know what, I'm out?
He wouldn't know that word, surrender. I mean, no.
Far from surrendering, Bates seized another fort, Ruff's Tower, which was outside UK territorial waters. Instead of restarting Radio Essex, he did something bolder still. On September 2nd, 1967, he declared it an independent state, Sealand, and declared himself its prince. It was his wife Joan's birthday.
And it was, of course, a hugely romantic gesture to make my mother a princess.
In addition to taking you out to dinner, I'm going to make you a princess.
He didn't take her out to dinner, but he just made her a princess, yeah.
Prince Roy and Princess Joan, along with their 2 children, Michael and Penny, set up home on Sealand. The sheer novelty of their lifestyle was a constant source of amusement on the mainland. This newsreel is from 1969.
The start of another day, even for the new royals, is no different than for millions of others, the request for a common cuppa.
Mrs. Bates, how is it possible to keep looking glamorous in conditions like these?
It's no more difficult than anywhere else in the world. We're quite comfortable here. We have all the things I want. Look, makeups, brushes and things.
At age 16, Penny was less convinced.
It was freezing cold and it had no electricity. To flush the toilet, you'd have to chuck a bucket over the side, drop it down about 80 feet, pull it up and flush the toilet.
That was your toilet?
Yes.
The Bates family had big ambitions to turn Sealand into a tax haven, a luxury island and casino. And they went all in on the trappings of statehood, fashioning a flag, stamps, currency, an anthem, even a national motto, Imare Libertas, from the sea, freedom. As teens, Michael and Penny would spend months on Sealand, holding down the fort, as it were, firing off warning shots and tossing Molotov cocktails overboard to fend off periodic attempts of invasion from rivals and buccaneers.
When the press eventually came out and took photographs, my father called me down and he said, "Now look," he said, "how many times have I told you, you do not hold a gun like that?"
You weren't holding the gun the right way.
And actually, if you look at the picture, the way I'm holding the guns is dreadful.
Firmly settled on Sealand, the Bateses remained a nuisance to the British government. So much so, as a warning to the family, a team of Royal Engineers blew up a similar North Sea fort. At Sealand's National Archives, which doubles as Prince Michael's dining room table, we were shown declassified plans drawn up by the British Ministry of Defence to take Sealand by force.
The following units are to be available to the execution of the operation: Royal Navy, 2 Wessex 5 helicopters, crafts from HM Naval Base Chatham, Portsmouth, Medway, and a clearance diving team. It's crazy, isn't it?
But it wasn't just the British government that wanted to dislodge the family. In August 1978, a band of rogue German and Dutch lawyers and diamond merchants launched a coup d'etat with designs of founding their own offshore casino. They arrived by helicopter with a film crew in tow, taking Prince Michael by surprise and then roughing him up.
They tied my elbows together, my knees together, my feet together, my hands down to my knees, and they picked me up and they one says to the other in German, "Let's chuck this bastard over the side, he's too much trouble."
You're a full-on political prisoner right now.
Yeah.
Sealand had fallen. After 3 days, Michael was released. Did Michael and his father then return via helicopter, fully armed and flanked by a group of bruisers, to stage a successful counter-coup? Yes, they did.
But I jumped and landed crash in the middle of the Germans. A sawn-off shotgun hit the deck, boom, and all the Germans went like that.
They surrender. That's it.
Yeah.
You've reclaimed your principality.
Yep.
Disarmed, the plotters were released, all except for one. His name was Putz, and he was made to clean the bathroom, make coffee, and imposed a fine for treason, $37,000. His imprisonment brought a German diplomat to Sealand.
But if you have German emissaries coming here to try and negotiate the release of this prisoner, doesn't that imply that Sealand is a state that's having relations?
Absolutely. It's de facto recognition, isn't it? It happened, yeah.
This diplomatic visit was critical for the Bates family. An international treaty signed in the 1930s established 4 requirements for statehood. One is recognition by another state. Sealand had already met the other tests: a government, check; a defined territory, check; and a permanent population, check, thanks to Michael Barrington.
So what's your position here?
Well, I do most of the engineering work, electrically and whatever. Apparently I'm head of Homeland Security.
What are you protecting this place from?
Well, the British government or anybody else that decides to take us over. We are a country, after all, a small nation.
You're ready to use weapons if you have to?
If need be, yes. No hesitation.
But in recent years, to keep Sealand afloat, the Bates family has updated their pirate radio sensibilities for the times. In the early 2000s, they partnered with fringe internet entrepreneurs who invested millions with designs of turning Sealand into an offshore data haven. Prince Michael's son, Prince James, showed us the old server room.
We used to run things like gambling sites, porn sites. We had a few dubious people asking us to do things that we didn't really agree with. There was an organ transplant company like Human Organs that wanted to host out here, which my father was against.
Gambling and porn is okay, but we draw a line at harvesting human organs.
Yes, exactly.
That venture failed dismally. But today, James and his younger brother, Prince Liam, are still harnessing the power of the internet. The Bates family won't disclose the size of the national debt or the yearly budget, but it is serviced through the online sale of noble titles. Become a lord or lady for $30. $600 will make you a Sealand Duke or Duchess.
And people are buying these titles. What is that all about?
I think it means so many things to so many different people. Some people love the act of political defiance. Some people love the love story that ran through it with my grandma and grandpa. Some people love David against Goliath.
That national myth, the very idea of Sealand, has now far outgrown the country itself. As for the House of Bates, well, Roy and Joan have passed on. And the rest of the lineage lives in the small English resort town of Southend-on-Sea. Princes James and Liam run a business harvesting cockles. Princess Penny runs a Botox clinic nearby. And 7 years ago, Prince Michael married and welcomed a new princess, Mei Shi, a former artillery major in China's People's Liberation Army. 6 decades after founding their private little country, the royal family remains committed to the bit.
Is this a golden age for Sealand?
Hopefully.
If the British Navy rolled up tomorrow and said it's time to reclaim Sealand, how do you respond?
Well, first of all, I'm sure they wouldn't, but if they did, I'd just get the best china out and make them a nice cup of tea.
It's estimated that Italy is home to 2/3 of the world's cultural treasures. Trouble is, the country's too broke to keep its historic ruins, churches, and monuments from crumbling to dust. Italy's up to its neck in debt. Taxes go unpaid. Corruption in an overstuffed bureaucracy is rife. But now, some of its most treasured and endangered landmarks are being saved, not by the government, but by a more respectable Italian institution, the fashion business. As we reported last October, it stepped in to rescue some of Italy's most iconic sites, among them the very symbol of its rich, violent, and inventive history, the Colosseum in Rome. With its stunning, timeless sights, it's justifiably called the Eternal City, a holy place to billions, a vast landscape of the sacred and profane, an architectural delight, especially when viewed at sunset. And smack in the middle is the Colosseum, the greatest surviving wonder of the ancient world, a memorial to the rise, decline, and fall of Imperial Rome, a place truly colossal.
We think it seats about 50,000 people, but this number depends on how wide you think the Roman behind was. If you think that they had big behinds, then you calculate less. Small behinds, you calculate more. This is the Temple of Venus in Rome.
Backsides aside, Professor Kimberly Bowes is the director of the American Academy in Rome and an expert on ancient Mediterranean history, who knows every inch of the Colosseum. She's taking us to the very top level, far above where tourists tread, for a site that over the centuries, very few people have seen firsthand.
The view is terrifying. The view is extraordinary. Look at this. This is where the poor people sat. You really get the scale of this building here, though. Look how big this is. Look how big this is. People are ants.
The place was built by the hands of slaves in just 10 years, finished a mere half-century after the crucifixion. The performers here were gladiators, wild animals, even comedians. I gathered that this place was the entertainment center, the Broadway of its day, yes?
In a way, the whole point is to produce marvels, to produce a spectacle that would have amazed the audience. The people with the most power, the senators, are down at the bottom, and the people with the least power, the slaves and the women, are up at the top.
Women?
Women. You don't want women to get too close to gladiators. You have to keep them separate, because your greatest fear, you have two fears if you're a Roman man. One is that your slave is going to kill you one day in your bed. And your second fear is that your wife is going to run off with a slave, like a gladiator. This is what everyone's afraid of, so you got to put the women up on the top.
So even though the gladiators were slaves, they were kind of the movie stars of their day.
They were.
And we turn to Hollywood for an idea of how it all might have looked.
There's a moment in Gladiator where Russell Crowe walks out right where we are.
Professor Bowes gives the filmmakers high marks for the historical accuracy of their computer recreation of the Colosseum.
The whole drama is really the reenactment of Roman conquest, the continual expansion of the empire.
Backstage was actually underground, the basement.
Until recently, this was just filled with dirt.
A labyrinth of corridors, dungeons for slaves, cages for animals, all brought from the far reaches of the empire, and wooden elevators raised by ropes and pulleys leading to trapdoors in the stage.
There's a wonderful scene in Gladiator where the tiger pops out of the floor. This is exactly the kind of thing that would have been used to wow the audience.
Since the 18th century, the Roman Catholic Church has venerated the Colosseum as a symbol of the early Christian martyrs who were put to death for their beliefs. Professor Bowes tells visitors there were indeed early Christians quietly executed elsewhere in Rome. But as for the Colosseum,
We have not one piece of evidence that any Christians were ever killed in this building. Not one. There are, I think, really interesting reasons for this. If you take a group of people who, by all accounts, are extraordinarily brave in the face of certain death, and you put them in this space and put them on display, who's everyone going to cheer for? They're going to cheer for the Christians, right? Because they show such extraordinary bravery. This is not a smart thing to do politically.
So I'm in the famous Colosseum where
6 million tourists a year visit here, snapping selfies and posing with rented gladiators who pass the time with cigarettes and cell phones. The place has survived fires and earthquakes over the centuries. Now there's a new crisis, finding the money to manage the crowds and keep up with basic maintenance. The director of the Colosseum is Rosella Rea.
The money isn't there. There's very little. Totally inadequate funding. Only 5% of what we need.
Too little money. And from the Italian parliament, too much red tape. A lot of people say the bureaucracy is so top-heavy. That's the reason why things don't get done.
Bureaucracy is not just heavy, it is extremely heavy. And we are the first victims. Bureaucracy for us is a killer.
But that scaffolding you saw earlier is a sign that help is on the way. The Colosseum is getting a badly needed facelift with money from an unlikely source. To prevent further ruin, a benefactor is spending an arm and a leg, $35 million, on a place where 2,000 years ago, gladiators and slaves literally lost arms, legs, and lives, and all in the name of show business. The benefactor is Diego Della Valle, a prominent Italian businessman who knows a lot about the business of showing. Della Valle is CEO of Tod's, the luxury leather goods company. Crafting stylish shoes and bags has long been an Italian specialty. Having made his bundle, Della Valle decided to give some back to the state. Why spend so much of your own money, millions upon millions, to fix this wreck?
Why not? Well, I am Italian. I am very proud to be Italian. And there is a very famous Kennedy speech, no? It's the moment that what is possible for us to do for our country, we need to do now.
The shoes that made Della Valle's fortune are assembled the old-fashioned way, by hand, stitch by stitch. And the work he's funding at the Colosseum is also about as low-tech as it gets. It's being cleaned literally inch by inch to get rid of centuries of caked-on dust, grime, air, and auto pollution. The stone is travertine, a kind of limestone. No chemicals allowed, only purified water and elbow grease. Days, weeks, months, years on end of scrubbing, built by hand, saved by hand. How long is it going to take?
The Colosseum?
Yeah.
I think 3 years from now.
And what will it look like, do you think, when they're finished?
I am very curious.
To get some idea, we were shown a few sections that had been completely cleaned. 2,000 years old and looking almost brand new. And in the world of high style, it's become fashionable to follow Della Valle's example. An entire parade of fashionistas are bankrolling similar worthy causes. The Fendi fashion house donated $3.5 million for some new plumbing for a familiar waterworks. It's the Trevi Fountain.
Marcello, come here.
Where 54 years ago, Marcello Mastroianni and Anita Ekberg went wading. In Fellini's La Dolce Vita, The Sweet Life, forever linking Rome and romance.
This movie helped a lot to build really this powerful image of the Trevi Fountain. Cinema has a big power.
Silvia Fendi's grandfather started the business 90 years ago. And as we spoke, huge crowds had a last chance to throw in a coin before the closing of the site for repairs.
It means that you will be in good health in order to come back. So it's very important for us. This country gave us a lot. And so it's nice at a point to give back something.
Elsewhere in Rome, the Bulgari fashion house is paying to clean and repair the Spanish Steps, where tourists stop to rest their feet. A Japanese fashion company with ties to Italy is restoring the Pyramid of Cestius, built to honor a noble Roman 2 decades before the birth of Christ and after the Roman conquest of Egypt. And in Venice, the 400-year-old Rialto Bridge over the Grand Canal will be cleaned and strengthened, thanks to $7 million from this man, Renzo Rosso. Is the government too poor, too broke to maintain its treasures?
No, I think we have to face with the reality. The reality is that they don't have money.
Rosso is a farmer's son, a self-made man known as the jeans genius, as in diesel jeans. He built the brand from the ground up, expanding into other businesses and becoming a billionaire several times over.
And I want more shorts.
His sleek headquarters rival anything in Silicon Valley, what with the espresso bars and daycare, where kids learn the international language of business.
Clap out. Clap in.
But the fashion industry is a rare bright spot in the stagnant Italian economy. And these workers are the lucky ones. Elsewhere, fully half the country's young adults are unemployed. There's corruption, public and private, and widespread tax evasion.
The Italian people are tired of this corruption because we have too many people that steal, too many people that put the money in his pocket. We have 40% of people doesn't pay tax. Can you imagine? 40% is unbelievable.
Pope Francis talks about the problem in scathing terms, saying corrupt politicians, businessmen, and priests are everywhere.
In Italia,
and the country's new young prime minister, Matteo Renzi, has declared war on the political establishment, saying the whole system should be scrapped. Diego Della Valle agrees.
I think it's possible now to open a new way. The old point of view was without any sense. I opened a new point of view. I push for the new point of view.
But as Della Valle's scrubbers continue their work, it's worth noting that his generous offer to restore the country's greatest monument was mired in the bureaucratic mud for nearly 3 years before work could begin.
This is the real challenge that Italy has. This is why sites are closed and monuments are falling down. The bureaucracy will have to change in order to actually make it possible for someone to come and say, here, do you want $25 million? Without the bureaucracy saying, well, I don't know, I'll have to think about it.
But time is a way of standing still for Italians. Past glories are always present. The food remains superb, and the noble wines still lubricate the conversation. On the surface, it's still la dolce vita, the sweet life. As for the future, that's somebody else's problem.
When workers broke ground on an underground parking lot in the heart of Rome 15 years ago, they had no idea what their backhoes were about to unearth. The site turned out to be what Italian archaeologists believe was once the pleasure gardens of the Roman Emperor Caligula, where some 2,000 years ago all sorts of lavish parties, royal intrigue, and debauched behavior likely took place. Caligula became the third emperor of Rome in 37 AD, and he reigned for barely 4 years. He's been portrayed in history as one of the most deranged and despicable Roman emperors ever to rule. But for years, scholars have been re-examining parts of Caligula's story to see if history has it right. Could we discover some new fragments of truth in Caligula's gardens? We were more than happy to go to Rome to find out.
The temples and palaces of ancient Rome may have crumbled long ago, but the legend of one of its oddest emperors lives on.
Down on your knees, all of you! Bend your heads! I shall sever each one at the neck!
What most people know about Caligula comes from this iconic BBC series, I, Claudius, which was based on 2 historical novels by Robert Graves. In the show, Caligula turns his palace into a brothel, makes his horse a high-ranking senator, and declares himself a living god.
For now, you may address me as Zeus.
It's a torrid tale of incest, infanticide,
Don't go in there.
and imperial madness.
Help me!
But how much of that portrayal is real?
Did Caligula impregnate his sister and then eat her baby?
Caligula did not impregnate his sister and eat her baby.
Did Caligula make a horse a high-ranking senator or consul?
No, of course he didn't.
Did he turn his palace into a brothel?
No.
So where did all these ideas come from? I mean,
Largely from Robert Graves. You know, his I, Claudius novels are awesome. But he wasn't an academic. He was a writer.
Andrew Wallace Hadrill is an academic, a professor emeritus at the University of Cambridge, and he's closely studied the few written accounts that survive from Caligula's time.
I grew up watching I, Claudius. I love the book. I love the old TV series. Yeah. You're telling me a lot of that just wasn't true?
No. What I'm not denying is they had sex in the palace. Of course they had sex. Mm-hmm. Pretty spectacularly. Of course they had.
Spectacularly?
But Wallace Hadrill does believe Caligula could be very impulsive and brutal, and he doesn't rule out the possibility that he may have had a severe physical or mental disorder.
I think there's a serious danger that Caligula was pathological, that he actually didn't care about the hurt he caused.
Wallace Hadrill says Robert Graves' novels were largely based on stories published around 121 AD, 80 years after Caligula's death, by Suetonius, a well-known biographer and advisor to later emperors. But Suetonius often had to rely on second-hand stories and gossip from members of the imperial court.
These members of the court, it's like staffers in the White House. It's like all those leaky people in Buckingham Palace. What are these stories worth? How can you pin them down?
Archaeology can help pin down the past, but in a city full of amazing ruins, not much directly linked to Caligula had been discovered. That is until 2006, when a pension fund for Italian doctors called NPAM started digging an underground parking garage for its new office building in the Esquilino neighborhood of Rome. In ancient times, this was one of a number of tranquil garden estates located about 10 minutes by carriage from the bustling Roman Forum. These recreations from Rome's superintendent of antiquities give some sense of the sprawling grounds and buildings enjoyed by emperors and their guests for about 4 centuries. It took archaeologists 9 years to carefully recover more than 1 million pieces of the past, while an underground parking garage and modern building was built around them. Everything found was taken to a large warehouse where it was closely analyzed, logged into a database, and when possible, painstakingly restored. The office building's completed now, and last month, Rome's newest archaeological site, the Nymphaeum Museum, opened in the basement, preserving some of the excavation and suggesting what a lush and lavish place this once was. It contains thousands of items from the 2nd century BC through the 5th century AD, like this drinking glass that somehow survived largely intact for 1900 years. Mirella Sir-Lorenzi, director of excavations for the Italian Ministry of Culture, took us to a small staircase normally closed to the public and brought us to the level of the ground during Caligula's time.
And so back then, in the 1st century, 2,000 years ago, this was outside.
It was clearly a garden because we found in the layers traces of the roots of the plants. And in this part here, the staircase connected the various levels of the garden.
Is it possible to walk on it?
Assolutamente sì.
Yeah. Excellent.
This is what Sir-Lorenzi's team believes the area looked like during Caligula's reign. We ended up talking for a long time on the garden steps.
Is it right to sit down?
Sí, okay.
There was something about touching those old slabs of marble that made ancient history feel very real.
I can't believe that we were sitting on the steps that Caligula may have walked on. It's amazing.
She told us the water pipe by our feet was installed by Caligula's successor, his uncle Claudius. His name is stamped on the pipe. One of the most remarkable things about Caligula is that he lived to become emperor at all. The emperor before him, his adoptive grandfather Tiberius, was suspected of killing Caligula's father, mother, and 2 brothers. And when Caligula turned 19, he was summoned to live with Tiberius at his palace on the island of Capri. It sits high on a cliff, and it said Tiberius would have people who crossed him tossed onto the rocks below. Through some combination of flattery and deceit, Caligula managed to survive here for 6 years with the man who may have killed much of his family. He became Tiberius' successor in 37 AD. He was just 24 years old and in charge of an empire.
He was in a very, very difficult position. I like the saying of Tiberius, who says, being emperor is like having to hold a wolf by the ears. There's this sort of savage beast that can turn on you any moment.
What is so insecure about it? Was it the system itself?
You've got this enormous concentration of power and resource, wealth, concentrated on the palace in Rome. And everyone wants in on it. They are prepared to do anything to seize this power.
Back then, the Roman Empire dominated the Mediterranean world, and items found in the gardens give some sense of the riches that flowed towards Rome. Rare and intricately carved marble from the far reaches of the empire decorated the walls of the buildings. Glass recovered at the site appears to have been used in very early windows, and large amounts of oysters appear to have been served at meals. Morella Lorenzi says her team recovered the bones of wild animals that would have been brought here from faraway lands. She showed us the leg of an ostrich, the foot of a lion, and the tooth of a bear.
It's evident that wild animals were here for the entertainment of the emperor. Games were carried out here with gladiators, we can imagine, and battles with ferocious beasts.
When he became emperor, Caligula started improving Rome's infrastructure. He began work on new aqueducts. He also cut taxes. Sir Lorenzi says this coin found in the gardens was minted around 39 AD to remind Romans that Caligula got rid of a sales tax.
2,000 years ago, politicians were just like politicians today. If they cut taxes, they wanted everybody to know about it.
That's exactly right. The coins are a form of imperial propaganda.
But something changed as the years progressed. Suetonius says Caligula wanted to be treated as a god and connected his palace in the Roman Forum to a major temple.
That's the Temple of Castor and Pollux.
Exactly. And this column has been standing there for more than 2,000 years. They have been created in year 6.
Paolo Carafa, professor of archaeology at Sapienza University of Rome, has been studying the Roman Forum area for more than 35 years.
So, according to Suetonius, Caligula extended his house up to that temple.
Exactly.
Have you found evidence of that?
Behind the temple, recent excavations have identified fragments of a large house, a luxury house.
He can't say for sure it was Caligula's house, but he says it comes from that time period, and only an emperor like Caligula would have dared do something so shocking.
He wanted the temple to be the entrance to his own house.
Which is quite unusual.
One of the things I. Claudius seems to have gotten right, Wallace Hadrill told us, was Caligula's capacity for both physical and mental cruelty.
There's no doubt that Caligula is brutal, but Suetonius says he's not only brutal, he thinks it's amusing. He takes pleasure in it.
Perhaps the most telling account comes from a contemporary of Caligula's, the philosopher Seneca, who describes how Caligula invited a father to a festive dinner on the day he'd executed the man's son.
And at the dinner, he insists that the father should have a jolly time. He plies him with wine and food. He even plies him with perfume and a garland.
On the very day his son...
On the very day. And Seneca says, people asked, how on earth could he endure to do it? And the answer is, he had a second son. And I think that anecdote just evokes the atmosphere of terror of the court of Caligula.
As I. Claudius showed, the end came in 41 AD, when Caligula was stabbed to death by members of his own imperial guard.
He's killed by his own guardsmen, but then they haven't got a candidate.
They don't have somebody waiting to take over.
No one in the wings, except poor old Claudius.
Does that argue the point that he had to have been really awful if they were so motivated to just kill him?
Yeah. It's an assassination born of anger, humiliation, disgust. We can't take this anymore.
Long after the assassination itself, some historians believe Caligula's enemies assassinated his memory as well.
There's a number of contemporary scholars who've argued that Caligula's critics distorted his memory, that they have falsely made him out to be far worse than he was.
Of course, it's like entering a hall of mirrors, and you know some of them are concave and some are convex, and there are no flat mirrors.
But isn't that terrifying that what we think we know about history is so dependent on rumors or...
But I think it's an enormous mistake to look at the past as a series of solid rocks that are, you know, that was definitely there and that was definitely... It's a great morass, a flowing sea. I think that ancient history is very good for people because it's got so much uncertainty in it.
But why is it good that there's a lot of misinformation?
It's good because the world we live in is full of misinformation, as we have learned spectacularly in recent years. You know, people invent truths. You have to be skeptical.
As we prepare to leave the Nymphaeum Museum, we couldn't help thinking about how time tramples even the mightiest of empires, turning lavish gardens into underground parking lots.
What do you think Caligula would think of what's happened to his gardens?
I think he'd be in total disagreement. And I don't think he'd be very happy that we're sitting on his staircase.
The sea ice over the Arctic is melting and shrinking so fast, we will see in our lifetime something that hasn't happened, it's believed, since the end of the last ice age, the opening of an ocean, the Arctic Ocean. And with that, access to trade routes and trillions of dollars worth of oil and natural gas, almost as much as the entire U.S. economy. But this isn't a story about climate change. This is a story about the competition for those riches. The Russians, for instance, have already amassed a major military presence in the region. It's also about pioneers, U.S. scientists and naval personnel learning to tough it out in the harshness of this still ice-covered frontier. We discovered just how harsh on a recent trip to the Arctic. The Arctic Ocean sits on top of the globe, encircled by Russia, which encompasses about half of its coastline, Norway, Greenland, Canada, and the United States, thanks to Alaska. We flew as guests of the Navy from Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, 200 miles in the direction of the North Pole, over fractured, thinning ice, to a spot where the ice was still thick enough to support this base camp. It was a small, temporary village, disrupting the peace and purity of the ice, white as far as the eye can see. The camp was built for a scientific and military exercise called ICEX 2016.
Hi, everyone. How do you do? Nice to meet you.
Welcome, welcome.
For 5 weeks, this no-man's land of ice was home to an expeditionary team of sailors, scientists, and engineers whose mission was to understand how to survive in maybe the most hostile conditions on Earth. The Navy says those taking part in this exercise are the first humans ever to set foot on this part of the planet.
It's actually beautiful beyond belief, isn't it?
It really is.
Chuck McGuire was one of the first to arrive. He's an engineer with the University of Washington's Applied Physics Lab that was brought in to build this camp from scratch.
So you get off the plane, there's nothing. There's no shelter, there's no indoors.
No.
There was just ice.
Ice everywhere. That's right.
And you say, how am I going to survive?
You pick up a hammer and start building.
They built a makeshift city called Sargo for roughly 60 people, consisting of a command post, tight living quarters, a mess hall stocked with food airlifted in weekly, and some very primitive toilet facilities.
That outhouse is really cold.
Outhouse is awful. Oh my God. So what about water? You can't just eat the ice, right?
You can if you know what you're looking for.
This ice mining team knows what to look for: old sea ice that's been baking in the sun long enough that the salt has leached out.
Ice mining team, we are returning back to camp.
They bring back chunks to melt down into the camp's only drinking water.
All the things that you take for granted in normal civilization, right? Shelter, food, the ease of going to the bathroom, right? That is all different out here.
What qualities do you think it takes to stay here and survive out here for weeks?
I think maybe you have to be a little off initially and really understand that everything outside that door is trying to kill you here.
If the ice and wind don't get you, polar bears might. An armed sentry patrols the perimeter of the camp in case one comes looking for food.
All right, good evening, everyone. Another successful day here at Sargo.
There's a daily briefing in the command post to coordinate the various researchers who are studying and trying to understand this part of the world as they plan for a more sustained presence here. They're analyzing, among other things,
the ice flow's moved about 9 miles to the west-northwest today.
How climate change is affecting the way the ice here drifts and migrates.
It feels like you're on land. You get the sense that you're on land. It's very firm and, the plane could land. But we're moving, which is kind of astonishing.
I think every day it's interesting to wake up and recognize you're 8 or 9 miles from where you were the day before. Looks the same, but it's pretty interesting to figure that out.
The ice moves that much every day in unpredictable directions because of the currents underwater and the wind above.
Down here, we're 23 degrees Celsius.
Also unpredictable is the weather. We met a team of meteorologists using balloons to help with forecasting, which is key for any military operation.
So these balloons measure your temperature, your dew point, the wind speed.
Commander Scott Parker, a meteorologist with the Navy's Atlantic Submarine Force, says there's virtually no weather data collected up here. In other parts of the world, meteorologists rely on satellites for forecasting. But up here near the North Pole, satellite coverage is minimal.
How cold does it get up here? Because it's right now, I don't know.
It's
People
freezing,
can see
right?
It's
the lowest we've had is 26 below Fahrenheit. And today's actually our warmest day.
Come on.
And right now is 6 below.
And with this wind chill factor, because the wind is really blowing.
It is terrible. It's about 25 below zero with a wind chill.
And you telling me this is the warmest day you've had?
This is the warmest day we've had so far.
Do you want to go inside?
I do. Let's go.
The temperature can drop to as low as 50 below, and that can wreak havoc on just about everything. Weapons, communication systems, sensors, and people, including these Navy divers who were here to test their latest cold weather gear and their endurance in the frigid water. These robotics engineers are conducting underwater experiments in a temperature-controlled tent. When we were there, Doug Horner and his team were field testing these underwater drones for the first time in the Arctic.
When we first put it in, we checked the ballast.
The drones are collecting scientific data about the Arctic, where the water gets warmer the deeper you go. They're also getting a picture of what it looks like down below.
My primary emphasis here is the ability to map the under ice. So we have sensors, sonar specifically, which is sound, which is focused upwards. And what we hope to do with continually putting sound upwards is to make a map.
You're mapping the bottom of the ice?
Yes, the underneath portion of the ice.
And why is that important?
I want to be able to navigate relative to that. So this is the idea of being able to navigate an underwater robot accurately without GPS. Because in the ice, you don't have the opportunity to come up to the surface for a GPS fix.
He says these drones could also be used to patrol the waters of the Arctic, looking for enemy subs, for instance, the way drones hover in the sky over a battlefield. The Navy is testing this technology and amassing all of this research to prepare for an expanded presence in the Arctic as the ice continues to melt. The Russians are already there in force. Last year, they staged a military exercise in the Arctic, as seen in this Russian Ministry of Defense footage. It involved about 40,000 troops, 15 submarines, 41 warships, and multiple aircraft. No one disputes their right to do that on their own territory. It's just that it wasn't announced.
We pre-announce ours. No one is surprised by them. Whereas the exercise that Russia did was a snap exercise, which is a bit destabilizing.
Until May of this year, retired four-star General Philip Breedlove was the supreme Allied commander of NATO with responsibility for the Arctic. What else is destabilizing, he says, is Russia's military buildup along something called the Northern Sea Route skirting the Russian Arctic coastline. The route could become an alternative to the Suez Canal, saving huge amounts of time and money for the commercial shipping industry.
I have heard as much as 28 days decrease in some of the transit from the Northern European markets to the Asian markets. That is an incredible economic opportunity, and it could be a very big boon to business around the world.
What would it mean if the Russians did gain control over the Northern Sea Route?
If the Russians had the ability to militarily hold that at ransom, that is a big lever over the world economy.
So tell us in a nutshell what's happening.
Along that route, what we see is Russia upgrading over 50 airfields and ports, 14 of them to be done this year, increasing the number of ground troops, putting in surface-to-air missiles, putting in sensors that could be used to guide weapons, that could be used to deny access.
In 2007, Russia went so far as to plant its flag on the seafloor under the North Pole.
I think it's important to understand what the Deputy Prime Minister said, that the Arctic is a part of Russia, that they will provide the defense for the Arctic, and that they will make money in the Arctic, and that the Western world may therefore bring sanctions on them, but that's okay, because tanks don't need visas. I think it sends a pretty clear message.
The U.S. has not tried to match the Russian buildup. The Navy relying on its fleet of nuclear and attack submarines, the most powerful in the world. When we were there, the Navy was conducting a submarine warfare exercise, something it does in the Arctic every 2 years. When a sub surfaces in the Arctic, they use shovels to carve a visual landmark in the ice that the sub can see. X literally marks the spot. But that X is a moving target because of the drifting ice.
There we go.
Which makes maneuvering a windowless steel cylinder the size of a football field to such a pinpoint location seem impossible. But on this day, the skipper and his crew, punching up through thick ice, nailed it on their first try. It took a few minutes for the sail, the shark fin on top, to completely emerge.
There they are.
When they popped the hatch, a special guest climbed out, the Secretary of the Navy, Ray Mabus, who'd been on board for 5 days, taking part in the naval exercise. What does it mean that the Secretary of the Navy has come up to the Arctic? Is there a special significance to you being here?
Our responsibilities are increasing as the Arctic ice melts, as the climate changes, and so the Navy has got to be here. We've got to provide that presence, and I hope that my presence emphasizes what we do.
As he flew off to Alaska, we climbed down the ladder into the fast-attack, nuclear-powered USS Hampton and went through a 100-degree change in temperature, from 25 below to about 75. Do you feel claustrophobic?
Oh, no, not at all.
No.
You get used to it.
Commander of the Hampton, Theron Davis, took us to the control room as the crew prepared to submerge.
Very well. Stationary dive the ship. Stationary dive the ship, aye, sir. Dive. Stationary dive the ship. Make your depth 150 feet.
What he and his crew of 20-somethings are practicing is something subs only do in the Arctic. Diving down through new ice that had formed around the sub. What is that?
That's the ice breaking away. It's the first time we surfaced through this thick ice and stayed up here this long. So that's the ice that's beside us. And as we go down, it's got to crack away from the hull.
We're listing. I'm tilting this way.
Cycle aft fence.
Cycle aft fence, aye, sir. 5 on deck. 5 on aye.
Now we're starting to see water. See the water on the monitor? That's only water.
Once they get to a cruising level, they practice hide and seek with another sub. In some of the exercises, they also test fire blank torpedoes.
So I'm going to show you a torpedo tube.
One of their challenges is ice keels, huge chunks of ice that jut down from the surface and confuse sonar-guided torpedoes that can't distinguish them from enemy submarines.
So what we're working on is saying, hey, how can we fix that? How do we know we can go and shoot a weapon in the ice and get a hit? Right, so now we have to go up there and we have to figure that out.
We return to the surface.
We're coming up right now. We're 122 feet.
One American sub in a region with a growing Russian military presence. During our last day at the camp, something dramatic happened. A crack in the ice along the perimeter became a giant lake. New fissures formed right through the heart of the camp, up to the doorstep of the command post. Everything was packed up quickly for an emergency evacuation, a reminder that the most formidable adversary here may not be Russian forces, but the forces of nature.
Can you imagine an orphanage that's a happy place? We couldn't, but then we found one. The kids don't arrive here smiling. Like orphans all over the world, they've been abandoned, they're hungry, sad, and desperate. But after a few years, they're healthy, well-fed, and, well, happy. The orphanage is in Kenya, outside Nairobi, and we might as well tell you now, it's an orphanage for elephants. They've been orphaned because their parents, their mothers mainly, have died, or more likely been killed in the bush. Poachers kill large elephants for their ivory. A young elephant can only survive a day or two without milk, so the orphanage's first job is to find the orphans, fly them to the orphanage, and before anything else, feed them. The principal of the orphanage, the principal, headmistress, head nurse, and CEO, is Dame Daphne Sheldrick. She founded the place, has been working with elephants for 50 years.
This is little Seguta. This is the one that was in a coma when she arrived. Was on a drip for 24 hours. We never thought she'd be alive in the morning, so she's our little miracle, this one.
But Daphne's problem is that she's caring for too many miracles. Poachers are killing more and more elephants for their tusks, creating more and more orphans. There's a record number of orphans here right now because, Daphne says, the sale of ivory has been legalized for the first time in 10 years. A few African countries have been given the right to sell their ivory stockpiles, more than 100 tons of tusks, to China and Japan. And conservationists point out this is yet another blow to Africa's elephants. Do you see any correlation between the decision to auction off the ivory and the number of orphans?
We do. Every time ivory is auctioned legally, there's a rise in poaching. And we also see the correlation in the price that's paid to the poacher for illegal ivory.
Is the price going up?
It's gone from 300 shillings a kilo to 5,000.
That's about $1,000 a tusk. And in Kenya, the number of elephants killed by poachers has increased by 45% this year alone. A rather amazing rise, isn't it?
It is. It's a scary, frightening rise.
Poachers were behind the death of this elephant. Her trunk was caught in one of their snares, and she had no way of feeding herself or her 6-week-old baby boy. He just couldn't accept the fact that his mother was dead, so he continued trying to suckle. Eventually, the keepers got him to drink their milk. They called him Shimba, and he was in such bad shape that nobody thought he would survive. But then he was brought to the orphanage, and things began going his way. He's 27 months old now, and is in very good shape, very muscular, very strong, and he's beginning to grow tusks. He never stops eating. In fact, that's the first love of every orphan here, eating. The institution has a dining area, and that's not all. As we found out when we first dropped by here 3 years ago, it has everything you'd want in an orphanage. Dormitories, each orphan has a private room, a communal bath, and a playground. The regimen at the orphanage is anything but Dickensian. Unlike Oliver Twist, when one of these orphans asks for more, that's what he gets, more. Ultimately, Daphne finds elephants more sympathetic than people. What is the most extraordinary thing you have learned about elephants?
Their tremendous capacity for caring is, I think, perhaps the most amazing thing about them, even at a very, very young age. Their sort of forgiveness, unselfishness. So, you know, I often say, as I think I've said before, they have all the best attributes of us humans and not very many of the bad.
Just about the best people you've ever met are the gentlemen who work here. Keepers, they're called, and they have extraordinary jobs. There is one keeper per elephant. He'll spend 24 hours a day with his charge, 7 days a week. A keeper feeds his elephant every 3 hours, day and night, just like Mom would. He keeps his elephant warm, not like Mom would, but with a blanket. And when it's sleep time, he beds down right next to his elephant. If he leaves, if ever so briefly, the baby wakes up and broadcasts his displeasure. The keepers are rotated now and then, so that no elephant gets too terribly attached to any one of them. At dawn, the elephants are taken from their dorms out to the bush. They hang out for a while, play some games.
Come on, here. Roleni, come on.
Soccer is a favorite.
Come on.
And guess who decides when it's halftime? The days are pretty much the same here, but on Fridays, the orphanage becomes a spa. You want to rub her down? Go on, rub her down. The keepers give the elephants a coconut oil massage.
We can't do exactly what the mother can do, but we do something close to that.
You're a surrogate mother.
Yes.
Edwin Lucici is the head of the keepers. He is the chief elephant man.
This one here is Lualeni. Lualeni is the oldest female we have, 16 months as well. The tiny one here is Makena.
Right.
Always want to be close with Lualeni.
Yes, well, they always want to be close to each other and to you, don't they? I'm afraid this interview with Edmund is getting rudely interrupted.
Yes.
But there's really not that much to do. They may be little, they may be orphans, but trust me, they're not as little as they look. In fact, I feel like I'm in an elephant sandwich.
Yes, you are.
Perhaps the problem was we had not been properly introduced. There is a protocol to meeting an elephant. He will offer up his trunk and he expects you to blow in it. That way, he will remember your scent forever. You will never be strangers again.
The little baby's been captured.
The orphanage gets distress calls from all over Kenya, from all over East Africa, that a baby elephant is on his own, often because his mother has been killed by a poacher. It is then a matter of great urgency. An orphaned elephant can only survive a few days without his mother. The baby elephant is loaded onto a plane and flown back to Daphne Sheldrick's orphanage outside Nairobi, where he'll stay until he's strong enough to go back into the bush. Dame Daphne has been running the orphanage for almost 30 years. She was born and raised in Kenya and married David Sheldrick, Africa's leading crusader against poaching. When he died in 1977, she founded the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust. Daphne saw her mission as saving as many elephants as possible, but she has never permitted herself too much hope. That's because she loses half the elephants that arrive here, some from pneumonia, some from trauma. This elephant probably witnessed its mother's death and remembers everything. That's the double-edged sword of having the memory of an elephant. They never forget.
You know, he's still grieving for his elephant family. He's in shock. He's distressed.
Do you believe a baby elephant can die of grief?
Oh, yes, I know it can. They're terribly, terribly fragile. You've got to try and turn the psyche round. Duplicating what that elephant would have had in an elephant family, touching them, talking to him gently.
In other words, love.
Tender, loving care. TLC and a lot of it.
Daphne and the keepers may run this place officially, but it's the elephants who are really in charge. For example, when a new keeper is hired, he's on probation for 3 months. Then, if the elephants like him, he's got a job. If not, he's out. What do you try to teach them?
Well, we have to teach them not to be naughty, not to push around with the others, to obey one another, Just like you have to do to your children, your own children, to respect the others.
And the keepers teach the elephants how to be elephants. There are wild elephant things these kids don't know how to do. Mother wasn't around to teach them. Things like covering themselves in dust to prevent sunburn. The keepers do it with shovels until the elephants pick it up themselves. The orphanage has an infirmary, and the doctor has a call to make. One of the elephants is not doing well at all. He's been on antibiotics for 2 days now, but he can barely breathe.
All this froth that's coming out of his trunk has got to be pulmonary edema.
His room looks like an intensive care unit. The doctor, Daphne, and the keepers don't leave him for a minute. They do everything they can, but it's not enough. By dawn, he is dead. How do you manage going through this all the time?
Well, you don't have much option, do you? There's another one to look after, and then another one coming, and, you just have to turn the page.
And you get attached
But I'm not very good at it.
And you're not going to get any better, are you?
No. Not after 50 years.
But then you go and you hang out with the orphans who are doing so well, and it brings joy to your life.
Absolutely.
It's actually a pretty lush life for these elephants here at the orphanage, but it's not the life of a wild elephant. It's not their destiny. So like any good school, this place prepares its students to leave, to get ready for life in the real world, to go back to the wild from whence they came. This young lady left Daphne's orphanage to go live in the wild. Her name is Mpenzi, and a couple of years ago, she became pregnant and decided to go off on her own to give birth, without the protection of her extended family. That was a mistake. Before the sun could set, Mpenzi and her baby were surrounded by a pride of 16 lions. Keeper Joseph Sawney was called to the scene and captured the events on his still camera.
So Mpenzi was standing there trying to scare off lions with a trunk.
Yeah.
But when they came, she tried to push them on this side, others come at the back.
Mpenzi didn't have a chance.
Yeah.
How did you and the other keepers react?
It was so sad. In fact, everybody was crying.
And there was nothing they could do to save the baby. It was a brutal lesson for Mpenzi. Nature has its own laws. They're a long way from the sheltered world of the orphanage. But this story has a happy ending. Just days before we arrived, Mpenzi gave birth to another little girl. The keepers have all come out to cheer her on. They named her Asante, which in Swahili means thank you. Mpenzi has learned her lesson. This time she makes sure her bundle of joy is surrounded by other members of the family. They help her up when she falls down and rescue her when she tumbles into a mud hole. So for the moment, Asante will be safe, at least until she grows tusks.
As Hurricane Fiona left a swath of destruction across the Caribbean and North Atlantic this past week, it was a reminder of the devastating power of coastal storms. Scientists are predicting more intense weather because of climate change, but they're also warning that one of the best existing sources of protection from waves and floods is dying off. By serving as natural buffers, coral reefs prevent billions of dollars in damage to the U.S. each year, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. The state of Florida, which has been hit by 18 hurricanes over the last 40 years, has one of the largest barrier reefs in the world, but nearly 90% of the living coral in the Florida Keys has disappeared during that time. The situation's so serious that marine biologists have stepped up their efforts to find innovative ways to try to rescue the reefs. And that's what our story tonight is about. It involves strange underwater farms, the U.S. Department of Defense, and more than we ever thought we'd need to know about the sex lives of coral. We left Miami behind us and headed 2 miles off the coast with marine biologists Andrew Baker and Diego Lerman. They're old friends and colleagues, professors at the University of Miami who've seen firsthand how the reefs have changed.
The whole of the Caribbean is seeing a lot of coral loss and die-off. as a result of climate change, but also water quality and pollution. But Florida Keys probably leads the way in terms of the sheer amount of coral that's been lost.
And that's why, in this spot in the ocean, the University of Miami has built something you'd normally visit on land to buy a tree or a rose bush, a nursery.
This is our coral nursery. This is where we, just like you do on land, you grow your corals, you prune them, and then you put them somewhere else on a natural reef.
Andrew, you good? All right, don't forget to close your ambient breathing valve.
The water was murky and the current strong as we went to take a look. A nurse shark checked us out but quickly lost interest. Corals are often confused with rocks or plants, but they're actually colonies of tiny animals called polyps, whose calcium carbonate skeletons build the reefs and protect the shores. After a short swim, we came upon an area with 40 of these tree-like structures. Hanging from them, like Christmas ornaments, are pieces of living coral that have been pruned from healthy colonies all over Florida. They're positioned close to the surface so they get lots of sunlight and nutrients, and occasionally cleaned of macroalgae that can damage them. Andrew Baker explained.
And the great advantage of these nurseries is they allow us to grow lots of coral tissue very quickly. They grow faster in these trees than they do on the reef.
Many of the corals growing here are important and threatened Florida species, like staghorn and elkhorn. Every diver knows you're not supposed to touch coral, so it was odd to be handed a clipper and told to start cutting off pieces. We brought the staghorn coral I cut to an area nearby called Rainbow Reef that Professor Lerman and his team began replanting 2.5 years ago. He showed me how to use a special kind of cement to attach the newly cut pieces to the reef. With the current, it's a lot harder than it sounds. But even more difficult is making sure these corals don't get killed off by the same forces that destroyed their predecessors: water pollution, disease, and a phenomenon called bleaching, in which coral can lose their color and die because of rising ocean temperatures caused by climate change.
We need to make sure that the corals that we put out are not just going to be the next set of victims for the next bleaching episode or the next stressor that comes along.
In a sense, it sounds like you're trying to accelerate the process of natural selection, try to find the corals which are hardier, which can survive in higher temperatures.
That's exactly right.
Did we ever look at
To do that, Professor Baker and scientists from the Shedd Aquarium in Chicago are using a technique that allows them to determine the future survivability of coral in a few hours on a boat anchored above the nursery. When we arrived, researchers were putting samples of elkhorn coral just brought to the surface into these converted party coolers containing increasingly warm water to see which varieties would do best in higher temperatures. Ross Cunning is a research biologist with the Shedd Aquarium.
So just like all of us are different genetic individuals, and all of us humans vary in traits like height, all of these different genetic strains of elkhorn coral will vary naturally in heat tolerance.
So just because it's all elkhorn coral doesn't mean it's all the same genetically.
Right, and that's exactly what we want to get at, is the fine-scale individual variation among different elkhorn corals. Then we can use those corals to optimize restoration programs by planting more of them on the reef.
So these samples...
Scientists are also trying to breed the most heat and disease-resistant coral together. It's called selective breeding. Liv Williamson is a biologist at the University of Miami. Her lab is filled with vats of frozen coral sperm.
So this is coral sperm?
This is coral sperm that has been kept at these really, really low temperatures now for a year or more.
Her work is similar to that of domestic animal breeders. She and her team mix the sperm with carefully chosen coral eggs to create offspring that'll be more likely to survive outbreaks of disease and rising ocean temperatures.
I never thought I would ask this question, but how do coral have sex?
So the idea is that all of the different colonies on a reef, they're all using cues from the environment to make sure that they release their eggs and sperm all at once so that they're able to mix with the spawn of other colonies.
The sex life of coral is nothing to write home about. Most spawn only once or twice a year after a full moon, so scientists have to be ready to capture the sperm and eggs at the exact right moment.
We use very fine mesh nets with a jar at the top, and they slowly float their way up into the jar, and all we have to do is cap off the jar and take it with us. It literally looks like being in a snow globe underwater. It's amazing. It's totally incredible to be able to see it.
This is where Williamson raises what she calls the coral babies she's bred. The blue light mimics sunlight filtering through the water, helping them grow.
This particular brain coral baby that you're holding right now is actually the offspring of a coral colony here in Miami that we think is resistant to disease.
So you know the history of these polyps?
Yeah, in many cases I collected them as eggs or sperm, or I put them together to fertilize them. Have been there really since birth, if you will.
Do you feel like warm and cuddly toward coral?
I really do.
Do you? Because, I mean, it's not something that...
They don't seem too warm and cuddly. I show coral baby pictures to people, and they usually don't want to see them, but...
Today, they're growing slowly on small ceramic plates, but they may someday be growing in underwater nurseries and repopulating reefs. And you said this one's how old?
Almost a year old. Corals in general grow really slowly. But that's part of the problem with their conservation, is that while we're losing these big, old colonies on the reef, some of those are thousands or hundreds of years old. They've taken so long to grow. Replacing them isn't easy.
But with less coral serving as a natural buffer, many communities need more protection right away from increasingly powerful storms that have been battering their shores. One way researchers hope to restore coral and provide more immediate protection along the coast is to create hybrid reefs. This is a small-scale prototype. The honeycomb structures on the bottom would be made of concrete and are designed to absorb wave energy immediately. The corals on top would provide more and more protection as they grow.
When the waves break, they throw up a lot of spray.
Inside the simulator at the University of Miami's Rosenstiel School of Marine, Atmospheric, and Earth Science, Professor Brian House and his team can create the equivalent of a Category 5 hurricane with winds up to 155 miles per hour.
So now we'll turn on the paddle and you'll see it really change a lot. Like they start hitting the, like right now, boom, right?
Oh my God.
And you see the waves are breaking preferentially over that structure.
The simulator can test how well different structures and types of coral absorb wave energy and prevent damage on land.
So this is Category 5. Wow.
The University of Miami is developing this hybrid reef for DARPA, which is the Pentagon's research agency. The Defense Department is looking for ways to protect its many military bases near the coast, like Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, which got destroyed by Hurricane Michael in 2018, causing nearly $5 billion in damage. DARPA plans to give the University of Miami up to $20 million to build a hybrid reef off the coast of Florida within the next 5 years. What role does coral play in that as opposed to just a man-made honeycomb structure?
Depending on the types of waves and things, you can have anywhere as high as 60% of additional dissipation of wave energy by having corals on top of the structure. They add friction to the surface.
I mean, this isn't just a man-made structure that is static. Because of the coral, it would actually expand, it would continue to grow.
That's one of the real exciting things about this. It's essentially self-healing, and if it gets impacted by a storm, it can grow back.
Professors Baker and Lerman will provide the coral on DARPA's hybrid reef with specific goals in mind.
They have very ambitious goals for you.
They do, and I think that reflects the scale of the problem, to be honest. We know that, for example, coral reefs are going to be facing increasing warming temperatures. So here's a project that's asking us to try to achieve what corals are going to face in 20 to 30 years within just a 5-year time frame, and then actually go well beyond that.
So they're saying within 5 years that they want you to be able to find coral that can resist a 2 degrees centigrade rise in temperatures in the ocean?
That's right. 2 or even 3 degrees centigrade warmer temperatures.
Were you surprised that DARPA was interested in your work?
We were surprised in the sense that it was the Department of Defense that was the first agency to come forward and say, hey, you guys, as a community, why don't you think big?
DARPA also recently awarded contracts to Rutgers University to create a hybrid reef that'll use oysters rather than coral, and to the University of Hawaii, which is developing a different configuration of coral and other materials. And DARPA is not the only government agency taking action. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is using nursery-grown coral to restore 7 iconic reefs in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary.
Push the other coral in.
There are many potential obstacles to restoring coral reefs, as Diego Lerman and his team learned after Hurricane Irma hit Florida in 2017.
It was a major setback. We lost 90% of all of the corals that we had been growing for a decade.
Wow.
It was a huge loss, but we also rebuilt very quickly.
There's not much anyone can do about a major hurricane, but perhaps the biggest criticism of restoring reefs or creating hybrid ones is that it's not possible to do this on the scale that's needed.
Thank you. You got it, man.
There are some people who think this is like spitting into the ocean, that this is not going to be enough to counteract climate change.
We get that all the time. But if we don't address this challenge in terms of maintaining coral resilience in the meantime while we deal with some of these larger societal problems, we won't have any coral reefs left by the time we get this other problem under control.
Without a meaningful reduction of carbon gases to address climate change, will you be able to rescue the reefs?
Absolutely not. The mantra is we are buying time.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predicts that with a 2 degrees Celsius increase in warming, 99% of the world's coral reefs could be irreversibly lost in the next 30 years. I mean, that's a pretty dire assessment.
That's right. So coral reefs are on their way to becoming probably the first global ecosystem that we'll lose as a result of climate change. So, we have no time to lose.
Temperatures in the Arctic continue to warm more than twice as fast as the rest of the world. That's according to the U.S. government's latest climate report. The past 6 years in the Arctic have been the warmest there since records began in 1900. Decades ago, an eccentric Russian geophysicist warned that frozen soil, called permafrost, contained enough greenhouse gas itself to pose a threat to the climate if it ever melted. As we first reported last March, science scoffed at Sergei Zimov's warning. But now that the permafrost is collapsing, the world is listening. We traveled to the Siberian Arctic to meet Zimov, who has devised a scheme to save the world in a place that he named for the last ice age, Pleistocene Park. Our trip took 3 days, and our final leg in an adventure of geoscience was on an aeronautical fossil, a Soviet-era Antonov. We approached a Siberia we had never seen in our imaginations, a forest touching the horizon in a land sequined with lakes. This was far north even by a Siberian compass, above the Arctic Circle where the Kolyma River fills the East Siberian Sea. 15 time zones from New York, we found the aspiring ghost town of Chersky. A trading port in Soviet times, Chersky was gutted by the fall of communism, losing 80% of its residents. There's not much reason to visit, unless, like many scientists today, you're beating a path to the Northeast Scientific Station to meet its founder, 63-year-old Sergei Zimov.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Scott.
I'm Sergei.
Nice to see you, Sergei.
He welcomed us in summer, when fireweed enjoys a few weeks of liberation. But 40 Siberian winters remained indelible on Zimov's face, the price of solitude for a geophysicist who longed to be remote from his communist bosses.
When people hear the word Siberia, they think about exile, but it sounds to me like exile is exactly what you had in mind.
Yes, only one problem, so long winter.
The winter's long.
Yes. Winters are long as ever, but not as cold. This ground was once so icy, humankind named it permafrost. But in the 1990s, Zimov noticed it wasn't so permanent.
Frozen ground, do you hear?
Yep.
It's roof of permafrost.
He can remember when his shovel wouldn't bite the frozen surface. But now he's down more than 6 feet.
In the past, all our soil, which was melted in summer, freeze everywhere totally, and it's happened usually in November, December. Now, in all winter, it did not freeze.
What does that tell you?
It means permafrost is melted.
This is a warning to the world because organic matter in the permafrost, plants and animals, has been frozen for hundreds of thousands of years. As it thaws, microbes consume that organic matter and release carbon dioxide and methane, greenhouse gases, which contribute to a warmer climate.
We just pulled this up out of the hole, and it's burning my fingers, it's so cold.
Yes, soil with water, and water is ice. In 5 minutes it will be melt.
Years ago, Zimov calculated there is enough carbon in permafrost to threaten the world. But big science gave that idea a cold shoulder, maybe in part because of Zimov himself. He endures Siberian winters when most Russians head south. He enjoys a refreshing vodka from time to time, smokes like a Soviet steel mill, and often just lies down to think.
I sometimes describe him as somewhere between a madman and a genius.
Max Holmes is a leading climate scientist and deputy director of the Woods Hole Research Center in Massachusetts. He told us Zimov's key discovery was that Siberian permafrost held far more carbon than anyone knew.
When Zimov made this observation, he couldn't get his papers published in scientific journals.
It can take a while to get papers published that fly in the face of conventional wisdom.
But science warmed to Zimov's theory, and now he's published dozens of papers in science journals. Max Holmes has made several visits to Zimov's station.
The estimates of how much carbon is locked up in permafrost keep going up, and most of us were probably thinking about the upper meter.
The upper 3 feet or so of the soil.
Yeah, the upper 3 feet, that's right. If you go down much deeper than that, the carbon content's very low. But what's special about this area where Zimov is, the carbon content of the permafrost extends to much greater depths. So consequently, there's an awful lot of carbon that's locked up there.
Scientists estimate there is more greenhouse gas in permafrost than in all of the world's remaining oil, natural gas, and coal. There's no consensus about how much of it could be released.
How far below the surface are we right now?
Right now we are about 10 meters.
So about 30 feet.
Yeah.
10 times deeper than originally thought, we found the remains of Ice Age plants and microbes.
Let's see if we can take some samples.
With Zimov's chief collaborator, his son, Nikita.
It's a ticking carbon bomb, as it's called.
A carbon bomb?
Yeah.
Nikita Zimov grew up here with his father and sensibly moved south for college, leaving behind the old man in the river. But Nikita's plan to be a mathematician melted away when Sergei asked his son to return to see what he had seen. A few hours from the research station, there's a vast subsidence of permafrost, sort of a rolling landslide called Duvani Yar. Geology is a slow science, but here it's almost a spectator sport. The bones of extinct woolly mammoths are thawing after more than 12,000 years. The collapse of frozen Earth is happening in much of the Arctic, including Alaska. 25% of the northern hemisphere is permafrost. The Zimovs have a theory, many would say a crazy idea, for diffusing the carbon bomb. They want to cool the permafrost by returning part of Siberia to the Ice Age, or at least what it looked like in those days, known as the Pleistocene era.
If we were standing on this hill in the Pleistocene era, what would we see?
No any trees. It looks like grasslands and savanna, and you will see around 1,000 of mammoths, around maybe 5,000 of bison, around maybe 10,000 of horses around this place, and also lions.
Lions?
Yes, main predator was lions here.
Sergei Zimov told us when man became the main predator, the woolly mammoth and other large grazers were hunted to extinction. Forest replaced grasslands, and that made Siberia vulnerable to a warming climate, because trees trap more heat than grass, and winter temperatures of 40 below can't freeze the permafrost if there are no herds of animals to trample the insulating snow.
So this is what you use instead of a mammoth?
Yeah.
As a demonstration project they call Pleistocene Park, Nikita Zimov is knocking down trees over 54 square miles and restocking the big grazers. The Zimovs believe returning the land to its Ice Age appearance will cool the permafrost even in a warming world.
You're trying to bring the animals back now. How can you do that?
Physically, I mean, or morally? Or financially?
All three, but let's start with physically. You need what? Hundreds of thousands, millions of these animals?
You need to start with something. Second, you need to prove people that the concept works. And to prove that concept works, for many things, you don't need millions of animals.
You brought up the moral issue of bringing the animals in here. What do you mean by that? I mean, some people say you're playing God.
You know, I think it's not me playing God. It was our ancestors who was playing God 15,000 years ago. Humans came and they dropped the number of animals worldwide. And we are just trying to get this back.
This is where the Zimovs' experiment gets crazier. What they need is the greatest tree crusher of the last 20,000 years, and they are surrounded with evidence of the once abundant woolly mammoth.
That's amazing.
It's young female.
Young female mammoth. This weighs at least 20, 25 pounds. Do you need the woolly mammoth to bring all of this back in the park?
It's like, do you need your right arm to live and do your job? No, you don't need it, but with your arm, you will do it better. So same with mammoths.
Today, one place you might get a woolly mammoth is in Boston, Massachusetts, specifically in the lab of Harvard geneticist George Church.
Sergei is hoping that you're going to deliver a mammoth to him. Can you do that?
I think he's hoping that we will deliver an animal that is very similar to the ones that used to roam there. We need cold-resistant elephants. That's what he would like.
Church is another scientist who's made the trek to Zimov's world. We return to his renowned genetics lab with DNA from mammoth bones.
If you look at the 23 genomes of the elephants, there's lots of evidence of lots of interbreeding all over the place among the different so-called species. So in a way, we're just recreating a hybrid that could easily have existed.
When do you imagine you might be able to pull up a truck and deliver this creature to Pleistocene Park?
I would say that probably in 5 years, we'll know whether we can get this to work for mice and maybe pigs and elephants. And then if we can get embryos to grow in the laboratory all the way to term, then it's probably a decade.
The Zimovs have not convinced everyone in climate science. Critics say they lack long-term temperature records of the permafrost, and their work is restricted to a relatively small area.
You know, to the untrained eye, someone could come away from a meeting with Sergei thinking that he's a crackpot.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he kind of plays the part.
But as a climate scientist, how do you evaluate him?
I think he's usually right. Certainly, he has controversial ideas, and a lot of them, I think, end up being supported over time.
What do you think of his concept of Pleistocene Park?
Fascinating theory. I'm fascinated by the science that can be done to figure out if it's correct. I'm glad he's pursuing this. We need to think about solutions.
The Zimovs have little funding for their big idea. The government donated the land, and their income flows from the rent that they charge visiting scientists for the research station. Theirs is science on a shoestring, with a very long timeline.
Sergei, you've devoted your life to this, but I wonder why you thought it was important that Nikita devote his life to this.
Why it's important? Our experiment, it's a long time experiment. Decades.
It'll take decades.
Yes. And it's also, you think about my grandchildren.
They have some intriguing results in the early days of Pleistocene Park. Data show the permafrost is becoming colder where heat-trapping trees have been cut down. It's a little more weight on the genius side of the madman scale, and perhaps early evidence that resurrecting the future of the world may depend on burying Siberia's past. New animals have arrived at the park since our story first aired last March. Not mammoths, but a dozen bison from Denmark. It took Nikita Zimov and his crew more than a month to bring them by land and river to their new home.
Chess has been around for 1,500 years, but until a couple of summers ago, the ancient game was still mostly a mystery to the folks of rural Franklin County, Mississippi. Few had ever played chess before. Many confused it with checkers. A chessboard was as out of place in the county as a skyscraper. But that all changed when a tall stranger arrived from Memphis to bring chess to the country, with a belief that the game could transform a community. He was initially met with bewilderment. Who was this 6'6" outsider, and why would anyone come to Franklin County to teach chess? Less than 2 years later, a chess boom is underway in the unlikeliest of places. Tucked deep in the southwest corner of Mississippi lies remote Franklin County, where the trains don't stop anymore. Half the county is covered by a national forest. The other half, it seems, by churches. This is the buckle of the Bible Belt. 7,000 people live here, and no one's in a hurry. There are only 2 stoplights in the entire county, and 1 elementary school.
What's this called?
So imagine everyone's surprise when Dr. Jeff Bewlington showed up at school to teach the kids of Franklin County a new subject, chess.
So everybody say, checkmate.
Checkmate. Before Dr. B came to town, had you played chess before?
I didn't have a clue how to move the pieces or nothing.
Only time I saw was on TV.
Donovan Moore, Braden Farrell, Parker Wilkinson, and Benson Shuxnadre didn't know what to make of Dr. B, as he's known, when he first appeared in 2015.
What did you think of Dr. B when you first met him?
That's 12-foot man.
The 12-foot man.
Whenever he came into the room saying he was planning on teaching us chess, I was like, what? Why would somebody come down here?
In the middle of nowhere. You're a logical guy, and it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
If there are people there, it's not nowhere. This is somewhere. It's just a somewhere that doesn't get a lot of attention.
Jeff Bewlington was lured to Franklin County by a wealthy benefactor who wishes to remain anonymous. The benefactor had seen how Bewlington had molded chess champions in Memphis, in one of the most distressed zip codes in America, and wondered if chess could take hold in the country.
Where can you put the king?
He convinced Bewlington to give a few demonstration lessons in Franklin County.
Does that stop him from coming here? Afterwards, I was asked, so, hey, what do you think? Do you think these kids have it? You know, could you have a chess program here? And I was, yeah, of course, they're as smart as any other kids I've ever met.
Motivated by the challenge, Bewlington signed a 10-year contract with a benefactor and left the city for the country.
What is he doing? He's X-raying the king.
Bewlington has taught chess for the better part of 25 years.
What's so wonderful about the bishop, and why might we think of it as an archer? Like, for instance...
He may not be a grandmaster, but he's a master of using chess to tell a narrative, especially with beginners.
This is a story about a little girl and a stranger and the little girl's daddy. Elizabeth and the Stranger is just my adaptation of Little Red Riding Hood to the chessboard. Elizabeth needs to get down here to E1 where school is, where she'll be safe. It involves just simply teaching how a pawn moves and a king moves. Oh no. Is she gonna make it?
I told you this is a bad idea.
I remember my partner in this project saying to me, we'd have maybe 12 kids playing chess. And he didn't know what to expect.
And how many kids do you have playing chess right now?
Well, a couple hundred. Hey, how are you?
Students flock to Bewlington in part because at heart, he's one of them. He grew up in rural Indiana and identifies with kids who have to feed the chickens, count tarantulas as pets, and have different tastes in food.
What do you like to eat?
fried rattlesnake.
Fried
Go
rattlesnake?
to my house. If we ever find a rattlesnake in a course of like a week or so, you're getting some fried rattlesnake.
Bewlington's opened up a new world to his kids.
This is a famous game by Morphy against Count Isouard and Duke of Brunswick. This was played in Paris. This is Paris.
We teach history, we teach geography, we teach science, we teach math, we teach it all using the chessboard.
Bobby Poole is a part-time preacher and a full-time assistant chess coach for Bewlington. Poole says there were doubts that Bewlington could succeed in Mississippi.
All the statistics, everything you look at, you know, Mississippi is the poorest, it's the dumbest, it's the fattest. We know that the rest of the nation has that conception of us.
People said that country kids couldn't learn chess.
And?
He showed them different.
We proved them wrong.
Proof came last spring in Starkville, where Bewlington's team of mostly elementary school kids from Franklin County faced off against much older high school players at the Mississippi State Championships. Rebecca Griffin was in the 5th grade.
What was their reaction when they saw you, a little 5th grader, sitting across the table from them?
One of them started bragging to their friends about how he got easy pickings.
Is that a little scary, playing somebody who looked that much older than you?
I didn't really think about it until somebody told me, you played a guy with a beard?
You guys roll in and they say, who are these kids, right?
They were basically like trying to say we were a joke because we were kids. But after the game, we usually beat them and they were like very shocked.
Don't you guys feel bad you beat all those older kids?
No,
I never
not
feel
at all.
bad.
I don't want that to make me seem like a cruel person, but I really am just okay with crushing people's spirits.
In the end, Franklin County dominated the state championships.
What happened is a bunch of hillbillies beat the snot out of a bunch of really highly educated, sophisticated people. So that's what happened.
Mitch Ham was among the many parents in Starkville. He thinks the victory served as a milestone for Franklin County's kids.
That was very sobering for them to suddenly realize, wow, we are good. So them having the realization of their own potential was a beautiful moment.
How did the other teachers react?
Over the course of my career in teaching chess, people say things like, I did not know that he could do something like that, or even something as simple and as crass as I did not know he was smart or she was smart or something like that.
What does that tell you?
It tells me some people got it wrong, that some kids have been underestimated or written off for reasons that are false.
Chess has helped Bewlington's players see there's more to themselves than they've seen before.
Chess is like something that I'm really good at for once.
Has it changed you at all?
It has. My grades have went up.
Your grades have gone up?
Oh, my grades used to be like medium, low B's, now they're A's and high B's. I feel like chess could take us anywhere, but it's not about where it takes us, it's about how far it takes us.
Last year, only 7 of the 93 graduates from Franklin County High School went on to a 4-year college. But every chess player we spoke to plans to attend college someday.
It's really shocked me how far he's came.
Jennifer Rutland is Braden's mom. She runs the First and Main Cafe, one of the few places in the county that serves a hot meal. She believes her son won't be flipping burgers for a living.
Is it fun to see your kids dream a little bigger than the county line?
Yes. So big that it's almost like, Braden, come on, get real.
Yeah.
You know, it just gets so big.
You always want to see your kids go further. And I think chess can be a vehicle to take them there, you know. This gives them a window at a young age that, hey, there's a whole world out there. I don't need to set my goals at making $8 an hour. I need to set my goals at whatever I want them to be.
Chess has filled a social void and given Main Street a pulse. In October, a new chess center opened in the middle of Meadville, the county seat.
Do you feel like chess has made the community more hopeful?
Certainly parts of it, yeah. Right, I mean, this flower hasn't bloomed yet. It's just starting to, right? There's a lot yet to come.
The chess center has become like a beacon in the county. each day after school, kids who have the desire and aptitude receive more instruction from Bewlington.
So what does black do?
They've become so immersed in the game with its infinite number of possible moves that when these students finish playing chess, they go home and play more chess.
Can the best chess player in the world come from Franklin County?
Maybe. Absolutely.
It's super possible.
Before they could take on the world, they would have to face the nation.
We'll take care of him.
The week before Christmas, 33 of Franklin County's chess wonders and their parents gathered in the school parking lot.
Y'all are coming back, right?
To begin a 10-hour journey to Nashville for their biggest test yet, the National Championships. As day
Queen G7, excellent.
turned into night, Bewlington and his students were lost in what they call the chess dimension.
Where are we?
Well, I don't know where we are. We're just in the middle of it. We're in the middle of problem number 9. That's all I know.
Preparing in their own language
Knight D4, attacking the queen and threatening queen takes H3 check.
for what lay ahead, a weekend of intense chess. More than 1,500 players from 644 schools gathered in a giant ballroom at Opryland.
Please shake your opponent's hand.
For 7 rounds of chess over 3 days. Every grade, K through 12, was vying for a national title. The best teams come from the best schools in New York City. And 2 hours into the tournament, it appeared as if little Franklin County was overmatched. After round 1, the kids from Mississippi had lost 30 of their first 32 games.
You know, it's a real struggle, and they're going to learn to struggle at this level, and they're learning that they have to struggle at a different level than they ever have before.
What's the feeling when you walk in here as a player, as a coach, as a parent?
It's a deep, agonistic experience, right?
Deep agonistic experience.
Yeah, it's real, true competition based on skill alone, right? You look around and you can see it in the parents' faces as much as the kids, that there's something significant at stake here.
Nervous parents from other programs tried to sneak a closer peek into the ballroom, desperate for any news. After their shaky start, Franklin County's players bore down, taking more time, probing for openings, watching for threats. A Bewlington mantra played in their heads: let your opponent show you how they'd like to lose.
Today's the last day, it's the hardest day, and it's...
By Sunday, with the final 2 rounds looming, Franklin County's 5th and 6th graders were hovering near the top 10.
Everybody needs to fight for those points today. We need them very much.
Parker Wilkinson, Braden Farrell, and Benson Shuxnadre all delivered for Franklin County. That left Donovan Moore, who was mired in a 2.5-hour struggle against a higher-rated opponent from Kentucky. On the verge of victory, Donovan was asked for a draw. He said no. His opponent snapped. The tension of the event bursting to the surface. Donovan Moore eventually won, boosting Franklin County's 5th graders to number 8 in the country.
Making their debut to the stage, Franklin County Upper Elementary.
The 6th graders placed 10th, 2 grades in the nation's top 10, only a year and a half after Jeff Bewlington first showed up to introduce chess to a small county in Mississippi.
One thing that I don't think I say enough is thank you.
I was thinking the same
for teaching
thing.
us all this.
What are they capable of?
Somewhere in the top 3, at least.
You think you can stick it out for 8 more years from Franklin County?
I won't even think of it as sticking it out.
What do you think of it as?
I think of it as doing what I want to do, being in a place I like to be.